guys, Steve here, Ponics. Today we're going to talk about
growing with fishes. Growing with fishes.
Hey everybody, welcome to Growing with Fishes episode 275. Sorry about the minorly botched intro there. I didn't quite sync up the start times, but that's okay. This week we have Scott from the Cannabis Professor podcast joining us as our guest. Thanks a lot for joining us this week, Scott.
Well, thanks for having me on, Steve. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. We have an awesome episode for you guys today. So I look forward to covering a bunch of cool stuff that I think you guys are going to like. Also, shout out to, we also have Marty with us today. How's it going, Marty?
Good. Glad to be back. How's everybody doing? Doing well, I hope.
Yeah, a bit of travel this week. Kind of got stuck in airport hell for a couple days, but I finally made it home right, basically at the storm. So that was pretty fun.
How was the conference? Was it good?
Yeah, the conference was great. Humboldt's always an interesting experience because it ends up being more like hardcore growers that have been doing it for years and years and years. So you can kind of ask some advanced questions and things that are normally kind of beyond what most of the average cannabis connoisseur is capable of asking or understanding, and also just access to really cool stuff that you don't really see. Thanks to Happy Tree Farms for giving me an Australian bastard cannabis cross that has about a 20% chance of ABC genetics in terms of mutation. What else? I picked up some Malawi Gold thanks to Sungrown Mids. Gave me some Oreo's Puck Cross, which is really good. I got, what else did I get? Some other really cool genetics. There was one other really cool one. Oh, a really interesting CBG cultivar that has blue seeds, like literally blue, light blue, powder blue colored seeds. I've never seen that before in cannabis. And then a really interesting line of some kind of freak show cross that I got given a nug of as well, that I had a bunch of seeds in it, and holy crap, did that have not only a just incredibly floral and diverse terpene profile, but also really interesting seeds that look like little eyeballs. Like they're spherical and more melon shaped than anything else I've ever seen before. They're very unique. The whole plant's just unique. So I thought that was really interesting too. And then a ton of other awesome genetics from a bunch of other people. Got a chance to hang out with Mean Genes and Mendocino. He's going to be our guest up here in a couple of weeks. And also Dandelion from Pride of the Lion Seeds. He's a super cool dude. He's going to be on our show in 2 weeks. And a bunch of other awesome people that are going to be on the show as well. So yeah, I think it'll be fun. We'll have a bunch of the other speakers on as guests here in the next couple of weeks as well. But yeah, I'll definitely get a chance to check that out over at Regenerative Organic. Was it regenerativeCannabisConference.com? I'm sorry, it took me a minute to remember. regenerativeCannabisConference.com will get you over to the Regenerative Seed Co link for that. We have last weekend of February will be in March in Michigan. The last weekend of March will be in Maine. Sorry, I'm just retarded today. And then the last weekend of Oklahoma. Last weekend of April will be in Oklahoma. God damn it, I cannot talk today.
Apparently you need another dab or something.
Yeah, apparently I need to smoke more hash, I think is my problem. But yeah, I'll talk about some of the latest cannabis I've been smoking later. Thanks a lot to our guest. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your show and what you do. You got some really awesome, really cool topics, and you're from the basically the same area that I grew up in, so I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, we just found out that we're pretty much neighbors on different coasts, all from the like northern Philadelphia, lower burbs and Bucks County area too, so pretty awesome. I started about 3 years ago. I think my anniversary is coming up around 420, right? Everybody tries to start around the Christmas holiday for it. But I always wanted to do a podcast. I feel, sometimes you have the gift of gab, but you're trying to find a subject matter, and cannabis was more ripe than most others, especially since the market was new in PA about 3 years ago in 2018 into 19. And I initially tried to kick it off because I was working for a dispensary group and they had like what's the $0 idea of the year? And I was like, we should do a podcast, but I'll just be the host. And then they never really took to it, but I had bought a bunch of stuff in excitement. And so I just said, you know what, like lemonade time, right? And started a couple episodes, dropped it for like a half a year because I had to manage for a while and it was kind of impossible to do both. And then picked it back up right before COVID actually came in. And I've pretty much just been grinding ever since. Also amazing to be able to listen to yours. And I'm sure have some questions because I'm about to go on to YouTube as well. So I know it's a big hurdle to be able to surmount. But my show is really focused on the curious part of it. I realized I'm purely driven by curiosity, which is great in a lot of areas, and as we all know, terrible in a lot of other ones. So I want to know as much as I can, especially about the things I don't, I'm gross stupid, especially. So a lot to be able to learn from your neck of the woods. A lot of the things that I think I've harped on, because I was always the MacGyver of my friends group. So always the one to try to build random stuff, figure out if temperature matters as much, a lot of technique and application. So at this point, I think, my interest was a lot more in like the medicine, how it works with the body. And then of course, the biggest mountain for me to climb is how does it come out of this seed and into these potent forms that I know so well. And really, I'm about to hit episode 100. I think you said you're near 300, right?
Yes, we're 275. Yep.
That is incredible. I have to say that's like, I feel like the triple digits is a huge go. So seeing that kind of grind, especially hats off, that is a mountain. And yeah, so a lot of my show really is just trying to kind of go into all the dark little corners and figure out exactly why cannabis works the way it does. And as a philosophically minded person, I probably also love to go on some side rants about how unfortunate stigma finds its way into so much testing, so much of the political side of it, and so much of just the basic information where it doesn't even seem like there's much, wars to be won, and yet still people constantly dog cannabis. So I feel a big purpose of mine, the best source of information you can possibly be, and create the best community you can.
So what just made you, you kind of mentioned on it earlier, but what really drove you to kind of start the podcast? And then certainly after a little while, it can be kind of difficult to keep going. What kind of made you want to keep going when you kind of reached a hard point or a difficult point with your production?
Yeah, I mean, my first big hiccup, I think I did 5 or 7 episodes in 2019, I want to say. If anybody even looks back there's probably this massive like 8-month gap between like episode 5 and episode 6, where I really did kind of trip over, oh man, is this just going to be you got to figure it out all the time? And, at that point, I would say if you were to look at my social media, it still looks like, a child is doing it. I'm not as motivated on a lot of those fronts. So for me, hitting that initial hurdle of just, what do you do now? You're in the big game of the internet, and there's so many people who've been doing it so much longer, so much better. Potentially, it makes you feel like you're behind the ball. For me, it was a little bit easier to get back into it since it was already something I was working in. I imagine if cannabis wasn't part of my sort of daily, it might be either a little bit more fun or a little bit harder to find topic matter because now I run into it more naturally throughout my career. But I realized, I think just before COVID hit, I tried to sort of prep the idea for the company I was working for at the time. And they shelved it once again. I was working in their education department at the time. And I just thought, am I really just in this because of where I have to clock in and clock out? This has been something I've been into for 20 years, breaking all sorts of laws to try to keep it in your personal culture. And it was just one of those times where I think I was able to get the test before the lesson before the test, as they might say, and just realized that my alignment really didn't have anything to do with my day-to-day paycheck as much as really just wanting to inform as many people as possible. So it took a little bit. I know there were some times where, you kind of wait 2 weeks during a 1-week cycle and things like that. But I think, even I tell a lot of people I'm a dude who smokes weed and hat, bro. Like it doesn't feel like I'm in this like massive media center, but to know that, and I'm sure you guys probably see it in your metrics too, that you can touch these little corners of the world. Why is somebody in Madagascar want to turn on and listen to somebody drool on about the endocannabinoid system? It shrinks the world in the best way. It almost feels like, like I like to call the crop circle, includes a lot more people than I thought it used to.
Awesome. So what are, I guess before we get on to more stuff on your show, well, you know what, we'll touch on that later. What kind of, this is a question I had for you, because a lot of people do this and I've always been curious, but I've never had anyone on that I could ask this. What made you decide to split your show into different seasons?
Oh yeah, and I'm still like, I feel not completely decided. I've had this thing on my one whiteboard in my production room that says like, renumber your episodes. Just, I feel like I probably have seen too many Joe Rogan clips on YouTube. It's just number 1263. And I was like, maybe I should just go to just blanket numbering. But when I first was about to start, I think that feeling of having to constantly produce and never really understand if a break was going to be like betraying your listeners, because now there's a hole in your production and they expected it every Monday or, every Tuesday kind of thinking, or whether or not there could be a human element. And so I think I tried to sample as much media as I can. A lot of people who'd been on YouTube a long time, like Great Mythical Morning, and see how the really successful people did it. Did they build in vacation time, or was it just, all access all the time? And it seemed like seasons could buy you a month out here or a month out there if you planned it right. I think in the last year, I haven't taken any of that time necessarily. It just sounded real good. And so like my first season's 30 episodes, my second season's at like 70 episodes. So I tried and abandoned it sort of out of consistency's sake. But I theorized that if I take a break for season 3, I might just renumber the whole thing and tell people I'm sorry. It's going to sound real weird when you hear me advertising seasons and it's just number 100 or something.
You do a lot of verses and side-by-side content on your podcast. What are some of the more interesting ones that you've done so far, and what kind of breakdowns do you do on your show for people that want to listen?
I like to find the space between ideas that neighbor very closely. I feel like, if the spotlight's on, it's easy to see the difference between left and right. But, some people just consider concentrates one category, or terpenes one category, cannabinoids the same. So I think for a lot of, maybe new to middle new users, especially with how many products come when a medical market first hits, there's a lot of confusion about what is rosin, what is full spectrum. And so I like to try to put sort of an index card between two close subjects. I think one of the ones that really got some of the better listens to it was, like a vape breakdown, liquid live resin versus distillate versus a CO2 extraction. So people could at least understand that the pricing really doesn't show as much as the formula does. And also knowing how much energy goes into growing the plant, it shows a lot more respect, I feel, to being able to discern exactly why people work so hard to make a butter versus a sugar versus a sauce and mean it, versus when people just throw terms around with no definition. So a lot of times it's product breakdown, I think. But for me, I get the most excited when it's more on the sort of medical breakdown, or how it applies to biology, one system versus another, or even CB1 versus CB2 receptor, so that people can understand, calling it one system, it's better to really think of all the pieces, the devil's in the details in that way.
One of the more interesting episodes I thought you did was on monomolecular pharmacology versus the entourage effect. Do you want to touch a little bit about that? And for people that don't know, the USDA, or the FDA rather, basically requires most drug products to pass, if there's multiple components to it, they have to individually test each individual one as an isolate and its side effects on the human body. What they can't just blend it in most cases and to have it tested to pass for medical. So you might have a wonderful product that works synergistically with each other, but would not necessarily be a positive experience or positive health effects if it was taken individually and not in a synergistic way. There's quite a few examples of this, especially with terpenes. Some of the different terpenes can actually be quite toxic if they're not taken with some of the others. So it's certainly an area of concern. Do you want to touch a little bit on this and what you covered in your episode?
Oh, absolutely. And funny enough, this has a relatability to a very recent episode, and even more so recent topic in the news, which was, raw cannabinoids and fighting COVID, access to the cell. whenever we find good data, I love to really not only look at the article, which hopefully represents it semi-realistically, but to dig down into the actual media that shows the numbers. Usually it's a very, very heavily worded scientific test. And what you realize is the way that these tests are performed, as you alluded to, is kind of the most bastardized version of a test you can perform. One of the med pros who works in the company I work for now, for Verano, he used to perform some of the lab tests, and he said if they're lab rats, they're very sick. I mean, they're albinos, so they're already kind of a mutant species on their own. And generally, when they perform the test, even on living tissue, they give it one drug until it dies, and then they just figure out where that point is. So they're not really trying to perform tests in the same way that we do. And what I looked at, which was the entourage effect, as opposed to giving somebody a collection of cannabis related molecules, maybe synthesized or in a purified form, to see how they interact together in living tissue. I think it was they took a rat cell and they had extracted human cannabinoid receptors and sort of Frankenstein them in. And then they threw in a synthetic cannabinoid like Win992. They threw in a non-synthetic and a couple of terpenes. And they said they didn't seem to mingle very well. So I guess the entourage effect is bullshit. And to me, Frankenstein's creature is not the greatest way to start experimentation. I kind of feel, especially with cannabis, like you're going to find probably the most willing populace to be tested on. So in some ways, I wonder why we have to kill so many rats to get to the point of just getting a room full of potheads to raise their hand. But a lot of times these articles are the basis of so many opinions in the political spectrum or in the medical spectrum. People refer to these headlines without ever really digging deep to figure out how applicable it can be. And at this point, I don't think they've ever tested truly the entourage effect. It's all been one color at a time at 1,000% concentration.
That's really awesome. I know I've found, especially with sublingual powders, the right CBD to THC ratio is really good for seizures. But if they don't respond to that, we've had very good response rate by adding linalool at small percentages as well. That those three in combination seems to work very well for seizure suppression. There's also other terpene compounds that I know other seizure patients have found. I don't know the different combinations offhand, but I know that there's different versions that different seizure patients are finding are highly beneficial. There's also, which I think is kind of ultimately where a lot of this stuff is headed towards, is these different ratioed combinations for based on cannabis. You see this a lot with people that find certain cultivars being highly effective against whatever ails them versus others. So it's certainly an area of study that we need a lot more on, and something that kind of is slowly being mapped out thanks to all these different efforts all over the place. Israel's done a lot of study on a lot of this different stuff as well. But I thought that was very interesting that you touched on that, because it's certainly something that needs to be spoken on more, and we got to get that law changed. There's just no reason for this. This doesn't serve any purpose in terms of efficacy testing or ethical testing either.
Yeah, this one, and it's a borrowed word, I swear. A med pro I talked to said there's a biphasic nature to a lot of this, and I'd been mentioning some tests I'd done with my cat because she's at an age where she definitely needs some supplements, and went right to omega-3s, something that I think, especially since you guys deal with a lot of fish-related items, you see a lot of omega-3 come up in those discussions. And as I did, a very basic amount of research into the nutrition value of it, they mentioned this biphasic nature where if you have too much omega-6 to omega-3, it's inflammatory, cancer-causing, kind of ruining your body and out of balance. But if you get closer to a 2-to-1, all of a sudden it's anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory. And each person, I feel like, just almost like a favorite color, a favorite flavor, has a different key of unlocking these ingredients in a certain ratio on a certain notch of the spectrum. And it really is potentially hyper individualized, just like food is at this point, just like clothing is. We dress ourselves in a way which is unique, although it's still kind of rearranging things. I think cannabis really has a similarity to the human experience in that way, where it's so much variety every time it performs that there's a way of being able to match up, your spectrum and your cannabis so that they can really balance each other and kind of help promote health. Whereas I think a lot of times in testing, if you're going to do it in an unbalanced way, you're only going to prove unbalanced data. So, it barely ever really speaks to growing the market as much as preventing or giving ammunition to more so the naysayers.
Yeah, and actually, since we're talking about funky profiles, I wanted to throw this up at some point in the conversation, but this seems like a good organic place to put it. Check this out. So this is a shout out to Bain at Vertica. It's an aquaponic grown wook stomper. Not the highest total terpenes, but the number one terpene is trans-nerylidol. The second one's beta-caryophyllene. Third one's limonene. Fourth one is cis-nerydol. Fifth one is humulene. Sixth one was linalool, and then myrcene. I've never seen a terp profile like that. It's that
like upside down.
Yeah, exactly. It's really weird. If osamine was in there, then it really truly would be like, all the weird ones. But I found this so intriguing, and does this just rock the shit out of me. This hits harder than a lot of dabs do to me off of a bong rip from this, like a full bong pack. Like it really rings my bell. I really wanted to just kind of bring that up because I just thought it was so cool, and I've never seen a profile like this. The only person that I talked to was Mean Jeans out at the conference, and he's the only one who's seen anything even close to this. He said some of the Lime Reserve comes out kind of similar to this, but nothing quite like this. So shout out to Bain and the aquaponic weed. We'll have a bunch available if you guys, not for sale, but if you want to smoke some with me. We're saving some for the conference in Oklahoma here at the end of April. So definitely come and check that out. Here, I'll pull up the THC profile on that too, just so if anyone's curious.
That is crazy. Yeah, you never really see like humulene or too many linalool dominant strains. It might be top 3, but it's rarely ever, really kissing the top.
Yeah, but it came in at total 29.61 and then 25% THC. So, pretty well-rounded strain all around.
Yeah, that is a puncher. Yeah, it is funny. Like when, same plant, but just a slightly different profile. Really does seem to just hit from a completely blind angle. Makes you feel like you're new again.
Yeah, man. That and like banana terps. That's the other one that fucks me up real hard.
This
rings your bell.
For me, I'm a super sativa girl. So the raciest, like you mentioned, osamine. I love seeing that in the top 3. Things that are going to be related to Trainwreck. And not even really in the Pineapple Express side, because I feel like that's Trainwreck down one notch, like a diet version. But generally, Slimer has been one of my favorites that I've run into recently. A very good pining experience with it in the PA market. I love sort of putting dynamite in the Ferrari. That's the experience I especially like, supercharging the brain. There's something just fascinating about, I think, pushing humans into an area beyond just okayness. And it's so interesting that, other things that could be used medically are just there to make you feel normal, but cannabis you can use when you are fine, and it can make you feel better than that and not be doing it in a way that I feel like is just abusive or exploitive in the other way. So yeah, for me, it's always living plus, whenever I can get extra energy on top, which is crazy. Feel pretty energetic all the time anyway.
That was actually one of my questions. What are the current popular cultivars or the ones really mainly available in the market out in Pennsylvania these days?
Kind of feels like the hot strains drop on the west and like Colorado to the west side, and then like 3 months to 6 months later they dribble over to here. So we just got done getting over runts, I think. Pineapple Express was dominating from 2018 probably to 2020. And then now it's all the fruity flavored sounding strains. Lucky Charms did really well for a little bit. Purple Punch, of course, I feel like, again, just in a very like 1 year behind everybody else, came through. And right now we are fighting quite a bit of just marketing relabeling. So a couple of strains that had their original names just being recast. I think Keystone Kush, since we're the Keystone State, has come through at this point. They started calling Hell's OG Heaven's OG by some growers to avoid litigation. And we had Illinois strain from Cresco called Joliet Jake. They renamed Sugar Plum Sunset. And so now that one kind of lost a little bit of its culture. But right now, fruit forward hybrids, it seems, are the big deal. And to the medical class, indicas are always a big one. BioJesus dominates that market for whatever reason. And then Hell's OG is always a big mention in there too. Tiger's Milk. and maybe a little lime sorbet from time to time. Oh yeah, and mimosa, right? Like that one also. I think recently we got in the state maybe a year ago, and everybody started going nuts for mimosa. We haven't really had any crazy cookies hit hard though.
Mimosa's definitely a good one. I hate cookies. Cookies is just cookies gets PM easier than like every other strain. If it's heavy cookies cross, seems like it always gets PM easier if you're having those issues. And then two, it just always has lots of those little nugs. And I get why dispos like them, but man, is it just like a bitch to trim. It's just so more labor intensive to trim than those larger, proper nug size strains. I don't know. Some of them aren't so bad, but a lot of them cookie strains are really brutal on the cultivation.
Can I ask you a question on PM actually, since you mentioned it? So in our market, since it's still medical restricted, they do not allow the spray of hydrogen peroxide mist.
Yeah,
I had heard that that's a
wouldn't.
common way to get rid of powdery mildew. Is that true?
Yeah, there's actually a commercial product. Maybe somebody in chat can remind me which one it is. One of them, the main ingredient is peroxide. I don't like, so the best way to get rid of it is to deal with live biology. So I personally like it as a product called Cease. Actually, screw it, I'll just pull it up. Actually, let me turn it off. Okay. This is one of the best commercial products out there right now by BioWorks. BioWorks makes a lot of good products, by the way. All right, so this is Cease. So this is just a strong, you ever see a product in the store called Serenade? It's like a red bottle. This is like a commercial version of that. It's a little stronger. It's a different strain of Bacillus subtilis, but it's super safe. There's a 4-hour re-entry interval, so it's like not a big deal. This is what I like a lot. So alternate this, and then I'll also alternate as another product called Sonata. I don't like the fact that it's made by Bayer, but it shit works, and it's a biological, so you're kind of stuck.
Is there, besides using peroxide or hydrogen peroxide mist, is there any other way that people deal with PM, or do you just lose that plant?
So the Cree natural farming way to do with it is to use, let me pull this up here. Well, I can pull up the UK one, but you guys can still see the product. So there we go. So this is the other product I really like for, it's called Sonata, and this is Bacillus pumilus concentrate. It works really well. There's another one called Death Guard, but you can use in a pinch. That's a Bacillus amphicooliensis that works really well for that. And then lactobacillus, if you're going to do a Cree natural farming way, it works incredibly well. The problem is that lactobacillus you don't really want to use in flower because they can, if you're doing just blind CFU count, it'll absolutely grow on that agar. So you want to use it in veg and not in flower because you're going to fail your microbial tests, and it won't be because it's bad. It's just,
shows up that way.
Yeah, it's also kind of acidic, so you might burn your pestles, which could be, make the weed unsightly potentially. So that's why you don't really want to use labs in flower, but great for veg. Probably the single best thing to use in veg. That shit will annihilate PM. But the biggest thing too is making sure you have bioavailable silica. Dosing with like aloe extracts, aloe vera extracts, or if you're using pH up for any of your solutions, using a potassium silicate is another good one that is pretty quickly available. But a salicylic acid is kind of your that you can get from things like aloe. And what's the other one? There's another plant that you can get a ton of it from, and it's Coot always talks about it, and it's escaping me at the moment, but that would be what the source that I would look at for silica. It's just cheap. You can get the aloe powder at a really reasonable price, and the bioavailability is pretty high. You can also add that to lactobacillus. So you can take things like aloe vera and just mash it down and put it into your labs and make like a plant lab, the same way you make like an FPJ, except you just do it when you combine your lactobacillus species and your milk at that point of combination. That's when you would modify it there. Willow is another good one. Mike said in chat, and that's absolutely right. My grandmother used to have me and some of the other neighborhood kids pick the new willow shoots, and then she would steep that, and then we'd use that as cloning gel. I don't know quite the preparation method that she used, but I knew that we had to pick all those, and she did something. I don't remember. She pressed it. I don't know the actual process. I don't think I ever paid attention because I was just a kid. But we used to use that for cloning gel. We used to do all kinds of stuff. Fermented nightshade leaves for pesticides to kill the Japanese beetles. And that worked really well. Especially the grape. They attacked the shit out of the grapes there in the Philly area. So
yeah, we were infested with those every year. My building's like just covered in red and black buds. So I wish I could use that on the building.
So what does work really good against that is IPMO, which is, so are you familiar with IMO from Korean Natural Farming?
No, not.
Okay, hold on. We'll just do a little, well.
Oh, please.
Sure. Let me pull up something here. Oh, I don't, yeah, that'll work. So, see if I have a slide on this. I'm just going to throw a slide up. It'll be easier. I'm going to have a whole separate video on this out soon. So
I'll be looking for it.
let me find the thing here. Okay, so I don't have an IMO1 collection in this, but I can explain the IPMO, and then that'll probably be easier. So Chris Trump talked about this in the show before, but basically you're going to take target insect or insect frass, and then using insect frass and target insect to get to 30% of. So if we're going to make a kilo of rice, we're going to take 300 grams of insect frass and insects into 700 grams of rice. You're going to mix it together. You're going to cook it until it's about, half, 2/3 cooked. Then you're going to strain it really well. You're going to put it in your IMO collection box, which is a wooden box that has slats in the bottom of it that allows local microbes to get in contact with whatever you have in the box, but kind of still tries to keep a bit of a barrier to keep rodents and things out. What you do then is you put the boxes out in an area underneath a tree where there's lots of natural vegetation, lots of leaf litter, a good natural spot that isn't a healthy forested area or healthy garden area that's been established for a long time, because that's where you're going to have all those local microbes. You then can collect that mix after 5 days or so. You want to make sure there's a cover above it just to keep the rain off of it, but you do want it to breathe. I have different slides I'll show on that if you want me to pull it up. But basically you set that box out. Once you collect that, you have a bunch of local fungi that will love to feed on insect carapaces. So if you can collect a bunch of the Japanese beetles, use them instead of insect frass, as long as you get to that 1/3 ratio.
Right.
And then you basically use them to collect the local fungi that feed on them. Then you can mix that 50% with brown sugar to lock out the oxygen, and maybe even 52 to 53% sugar. So you want to, so that you basically have equal parts or slightly more sugar than equal parts of the IMO1 collection. And you mix that all together, and that stabilizes it, shelf stabilizes it. So you have that for up to 3 years. That's good for that. You can scoop out and then brew up a batch of those local fungal spores that you've now preserved in that sugar solution to use as a spray. This is a caterpillar that was on one of our plants after we sprayed, and it just obliterated them.
Yeah, completely. It's like a bad Star Trek episode.
And he's covered in spores that can affect other caterpillars, which is cool. So this allowed us to do that. So we did this in Zimbabwe with grasshoppers, and it worked really well. We did this last year out here in Oklahoma. It worked really well. So this is kind of a tech that's kind of an R&D thing to make sure it really worked before we talked about it. It was Chris Trump came up with this originally. This is not my idea. I don't claim credit. I've worked with this quite a bit thanks to him. But he came up with this. He had a batch of IMO that he was making into IMO3, and they found weevils in some of the whatever the material was that they were using for it. And he just said, screw it. We'll just use it anyway. It's going to get hot. It'll kill them. It doesn't matter. And then what he found was when they got it to IMO4, all the little weevils were covered in looked like popcorn. They were so covered in this predatory fungi that did it. So if you need the quick and dirty, you can do straight to IMO2, like we talked about, where you cut it with the sugar and now it's shelf stable. And then you can teaspoon that out as you need it to make your sprays. Or you can take that and mix it with a bunch of wood chips and grain to turn it into an IMO3. And then you can turn that. And once those microbes take hold, it'll start to heat up. You have to turn it and keep it at the right temperature to convert it into an IMO4. But that actually is a little bit better for liquid IMO, but you can convert either liquid IMO4 or IMO4 and IMO2 into these liquid IMO. So you take some of that, like we talked about, the sugar solution from IMO2, put that into just a vat, like a 5-gallon bucket or whatever else you're going to do to brew up for your insect sprays, and then just brew it for 12 to 24 hours so you can wake those microbes back up and then apply to your garden. And it works very, very well at treating large scale stuff. It works really good at outdoor grows because you can collect your stuff. And yeah, I think actually I was going to show on one other slide, but I think I'll wait until we cover that later.
No worries. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, I was not aware of predatory microorganism. That's definitely going on my list of deep dives to go into the internet and get stuck in a hole on. That's super cool.
This is the downside, is you do have to be careful around bees. They can screw your stuff up.
Yeah.
So just be careful if you have, so if you have a bunch of tomatoes or cucumbers and flower, something like, maybe don't use this near the flowers. Just use it on the other parts of the plant. Just be careful around flower structures because you will kill your bees as well.
Yeah, now we need bees.
Yeah, so it's just a word of caution that it's not totally like hyper targeted towards bad insects, right? So just keep that in mind when you're using it in application. So and what time of day you maybe apply it once the sun goes down to really reduce your chance of bees and things like that if you're doing an outdoor grow. But I love this for large scale outdoor grows. If we have acres and acres and acres, I can carpet bomb the whole place with the local fungi that kill all the bugs there. And it really knocks down the larger ones. So your large grasshoppers, caterpillars, butterflies, those larger arthropods that are typically harder to kill with other biological treatments, unless you have large arthropods like assassin bugs or to a lesser extent aureus, they can kill stuff much larger than them. They're kind of not a ton of answers. I mean, there's a few biologicals, but they're not quite as good. Nothing works as good as that.
That's incredible. Now, I think what they use a lot in our market, the only one that's approved through the DOH is organic neem oil. And outside of that, as far as a pesticide, I think the good growers try to use mites most of the time. But because of the scale of the indoor, I think a lot of them, even when I was reading up on what you had mentioned on your website, saying that certain hydroponic like pH shifting agents will have antibacterial stuff to help clear drip lines. And I've wondered as well, like, how much do you have to sort of sacrifice that attention just for scale in certain instances?
Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to pull up the other deck that I have. I'll find it here in a second. That has some of the more KNF stuff in it. But actually, I could just pull it from here. But just so you can see a better idea of what I'm talking about. But check out the videos from Chris Trump if you want to learn more about this. He has a whole guide on natural farming, tons of videos on all these topics, like 40-minute breakdowns in each step and everything. Whereas I kind of teach a lot of the quick and dirty stuff. People, especially commercial growers, don't always want to spend a ton of time on their stuff here. So, okay, so we'll just go through this a little bit. So this is your IMO 1. So you can see here, you're going to take the rice, you're going to cook it until it's like Chris says, al dente pasta, but kind of 70-75% finished, not fully finished. Drain it so it's kind of, mostly cooked, but still a little bit stiff. Then you're going to put it in your IMO boxes and then set it out. And it should look like this or this. It should look like a little white forest. You can have some color in it. You just don't want too much green. Too much green is too much trichoderma, which is not good. A little bit of pink or orange or things like that is okay. A little bit of blue is okay, just not too much. You know, that as long as it's no more than 3 to 5%, then you're okay. But if it's too much, then just throw it away. Do a new collection. That's fine. And what you want to do is you want to set out 6 or 10 boxes at a time when you do this. The more collections you can do, the better. And then try to do at least one a month, or maybe 2 collections a month if you can, because then you can get the microbes from different parts of the year, which help you. You can kind of jumpstart the garden in the beginning of the year and things like that in terms of microbial balance in your soil and using local microbes. The black is just where some of the rice is eating the stuff down and it produces a little bit of metabolites. It can be a little gray too, that's okay. And then you have IMO2. So this is the IMO2. So this is what I was talking about. So now we've collected it after 5 days and it looks really nice. So we're going to take that and mix it with equal weight of sugar, or sometimes we'll do 2 to, just a little bit more sugar, slightly more. And then we're going to mix it all together and it'll look like this. And then once it settles, it'll kind of look like this. Be a little bit of rice left, but not much. That's why you do want to put it into like a paint strainer or something when you're, what's it called? Put it in like a paint strainer or something when you're brewing it. You don't want to necessarily pour it right in. But yeah, hopefully that gives you an idea. This will kind of turn more liquidy as it gets time for those microbes to kind of stabilize.
Right. So you said the brown sugar starts to limit oxygen in that stage when you add it, and that's where the stability comes from. Because if it ferments, usually that's off-gassing. Does this need to be burped in any way, or does it build pressure, or does it just kind of stay on its own?
Yeah. So you leave the lid on, but you leave it cracked enough to where it can burp if it needs to. That's why I like using these cheese ball containers, because the lids work really good for that, and it gives me an excuse to buy cheese balls. And and also too, like you can do a couple collections and fill it up and then label it and like, here's this January and February or whatever. And they make good storage containers long-term. Plus I hate throwing it in large useful containers,
Yeah. They're only useful if we figure them out. I know this one woman, one of the managers of the dispensary, she makes a butt ton of kombucha. I feel like she just might be willing to do this for fun.
And then your liquid IMO, I'll throw this up. So you would do, again, something very similar to this. Again, you can do it without the labs. You can do it with the labs. I know not all recipes do this, but this is specifically for aquaponics. I like adding the labs as well. And then brewing this for, anywhere from 12 to 36 hours. You don't have to do it quite as long as what I have on here, but just gives you an idea of, a mix. You can also feed a little rice flour too. The extra starch helps brew them up.
And yeah, no, that's easy enough to follow for it. That's super helpful. Yeah, I was not aware that that's awesome to know a little bit more about that.
So one thing I do want to mention is that for the IPMO, the one with the insect frass, you do not add labs. Labs can potentially kill off the fungi. So don't ever use labs with that application. That would be the one thing I would subtract for that. What I showed is a maintenance mix for aquaponics. I just kind of give you an idea of how you'd go about it. I should have showed a different one. I have a better one in it. Slide deck. This one. Well, this can just give you an idea of what it can do. So this plant that was put in here was like 18 hours in the system, sitting above the water, and this is what it shot down in 18 hours. It's such vigor on the roots, and then this is what that plant looked like about 2 months later. Wow. But we use the liquid IMO all the time for, again, maintaining system health, and aquaponics kind of fills in a lot of mineralization gaps that normally people have, just never introduced into their systems.
And that is fascinating. Is it used in any large food applications currently, the aquaponics approach? Has it been adopted by any larger scale ones on that side of it? Yeah,
so actually the lactobacillus stuff especially as well, we've used to treat E. coli. So we end up with this non-human pathogenic E. coli, just soil E. coli, that sometimes tests, it gives us false positives, and then they have to go test the species, get it further tested to ensure food safety. And it becomes a problem for some facilities, but there's two lettuce facilities and one cannabis facility that have tested hot for that, and we managed to treat them completely within 30 days with just lactobacillus and nothing else. So a lot of these things offer solutions that there's no other solution on the market that will allow you to not lose the nutrient cycle and the mineralization cycling in your system and then still treat the E. coli. So I think this is truly, I think in 5 or 10 years from now, you'll see lactobacillus be required for aquaponics and potentially even hydroponics, just strictly for food safety reasons. It really does make a lot of sense. It has lots of vitamin B compounds in it, so it can help make your plants grow faster. Humans are 70%-ish of our microbiome is lactobacillus species in terms of, what is it, by weight or whatever. So this is it makes a ton of sense that it helps with that. And then also, just like Mike's saying in chat, the more microbes you have in the root system, the more secondary metabolites the plant's going to produce, because it's exposed to more types of microbes to try and make defenses against, or at least prepare for the possibility of it. So that adding the things like the liquid IMO from the local forest collections really does help kind of stimulate that plant even further and really slam those terpenes. If you're trying to hit those 3%, 4%, 5% terpene values, that's how you do it. You've got to really get this ultra microbial diverse soil systems, living soil or aquaponics or some combination thereof, like we like with dual root zones. That's really where you're going to have a ton of advantages. And then even some of the other stuff, I'll throw this up just because we were talking about some of the other lactobacillus stuff. This is Blue Labs. So this is lactobacillus with spirulina and kelp extract that we make in order to make a growth accelerator version of labs. So it's a super interesting thing. I have a video I'm working on that as well. Working on kind of a little KNF video series with a bunch of stuff that's kind of not out yet. And then you can also do it with the insect frass as well. You can use labs with frass and make the chitinase available in that as well. So, or make not chitinase, but you can break down the chitin so the plants make chitinase right away, and it makes the plants react to it really strongly. Make it think it's under insect attack when you water that in. So it's good stuff. There's all different ways that we're able to organically start playing with these hormones that we haven't. There you go. Mike West says the best weed in Canada he's seen has been the aquaponic weed. So nice.
Mm-hmm. I saw something, a quote on your website that said aquaponics produce some of the smoothest weed. And I was kind of wondering, how would you, if you had to put a list of criteria, what makes weed smooth or what makes it harsh? Is it down to a certain nutrient, chemical, molecule, or way it's treated when it's growing?
A lot of it has to do with the cure. I think that's usually with it, but usually it's just, does it make you cough or not? Is it really like, is it harsh or not? I'm trying to think of how to define it other than like wanting to cough or just have an unpleasant mouth feel. Maybe is another way to define it, other than just the inducing of coughing.
Do you think there's something that weed that makes people cough more? There's a way of guaranteeing like, oh, if you screw up this step, it'll make it shift harsher, or this step seems to always smoothen like the product or add some smoothness to it?
Sure. So I think what it is, and this is just a theory, but I think and living soil is very similar as well, is you're not running super high parts per million nutrient values in the plant at any one time. It's running low ones that are hyper bioavailable. And that's really one of the reasons why I think aquaponics tastes better than hydroponics, aside from having those extra microbial stimulants on the terpene production and secondary metabolite production, is just the fact that you don't have to run very high nutrient levels most of the time to hit. We're looking at usually a third to a quarter of the nutrient values of hydroponics for most things. Not so much micronutrients, because those are pretty much, you can't really change those. They're pretty hardly defined in the plant, but certainly the macros are running much, much lower than others. And then we've also did some interesting studies of silica and how that really helps with heat resistance and bolting and foxtailing and reducing a lot of those issues, as well as increasing the cold resistance, which is interesting. So definitely something that I think people kind of underlook on the nutrient side, but also, you know, but to answer your question on the harshness, certainly, you know, overdosing those nutrients and that the plant over storing some of those in the plants themselves, and it just gives it a not pleasant taste. Or, you know, stuff that just isn't cured long enough, the extra chlorophyll until it has a chance to break down is not pleasant to taste. But I think that's really comes down to fertigation, and I think that's also why people, you know, flushed back so much back in the day, was because they, you know, were running crazy ppm levels. I mean, there's the guys from, what is it, 3 a light or 4 a light or whatever it is, they're running like 3,000 ppms or 2,800 ppms. Yeah, I'm sure that stuff tastes great. You know,
Burns straight to like a weird black soot instead of like an ash.
right. But you can trick the plants into doing a lot of these crazy things with things like, you know, malted barley, or the insect frass ferments and insect frass IMO collections. That's another thing with the fungi with that insect frass makes hyper available chitin, you know, and chitinase from that mushroom. So because that's what we're basically collecting is the fungal portion of it. So even the ones that aren't, you know, the predatory ones that are going to be there for a pest control are still, you know, providing that hyper available, you know, stuff in that way. So it just kind of further benefits the plant and stimulates its immune system, because when the plant detects that, it thinks, oh, there's insects around, I need to increase my defenses, which means I need more terpenes. And this is this kind of stuff that people try to sell stuff for terps, and it's like, yeah, but that's not really going to do that much, right? Like, you know, there's a bud sweeteners and all that shit. It's like, that doesn't do anything.
It has to want to make them. It seems to be the case.
So what's the selection on pest controls in the stores there? I know that certainly was an issue when I work in Georgia as well, and we have a bitch of a time getting any of the good products locally. We have to basically order everything online because there aren't any good, you know, pest control agents that are safe to work with. Is that still the case up there, or are they getting a little better?
From what I can tell, it's still pretty much the case. I think the only place I've even seen neem oils at like a hippie store up in Quakertown. But outside of that, a lot of them are very difficult to get. I think the rules that they have even between growers is it kind of forces a little bit of that like trade secreting. And so I think most things pretty much have to come from out of state at this point. We had the biggest sort of, I guess, headline. One of the companies, and again, in no way an insult to them, it just literally was in the news. Standard Farms, maybe like 2 years ago, was found with non-compliant. They were doing a hydrogen peroxide spray, and of course, when it's in a state where it's not allowed, everybody has these stories they like to tell about what it's doing, and oh, well, it's not bad if you vape it, but what if you combust it? And all of a sudden, you know, people are talking about sensitivity to cannabis and the flu-like symptoms and stuff, and all thinking it's either because there's neem oil on it and it wasn't in street weed, or because they were spraying it and not telling anybody. You know, I think the company denied it, but 3 XCOs, and it was just the left and right. The funniest part was the guy who sprayed it submitted the invoice. And so, like, you know, it didn't really matter about the gossip anymore. But that was probably the most that had bubbled up, kind of showing the level of like lack of discussion going on. We have a company called INSA that are a bunch of organic dairy farmers from Wisconsin and Massachusetts. And I got to talk to them briefly, and they seem to have that same pattern of approach that I'd say you kind of say as well, of just like wanting to make the cleanest and strongest plant that they possibly can, as opposed to wanting to make the most possible plant that they can specifically. And so it was a breath of fresh air, but seeing that they came from organics in a different area, you know, and in farming, since there's a lot more hormones with animal treatment, especially, it seemed like they wanted a breath of fresh. So I could tell from some of them, it's still a little young. I think we're probably 2 years off from a rec market, because Jersey goes rec. A lot of people think of the next 3 months, and that's just kind of crazy to think you can go down the shore and now you can buy a nickel bag from a store instead of that weird kid on the boardwalk.
Like, if you look at if you have dreads, they'll pull you over at the shore. I got pulled over and like doing 26 and a 35, stuck between 2 minivans. They said I was speeding, and I was like, we both know you're full of shit. I've also had to go drive down to Atlantic, Ocean City, and bail friends out of jail, and all that stuff. But yeah.
You know, I got to see this one. I sometimes vacation in some car enthusiasm on YouTube, and I was kind of happy in a way because, as we know, like if you fit the description right, you're just gonna have to deal with a little bit more attention than you want to most nights. And it's these two Australian guys who are really into V Dubs, and they went to Germany for like their big trip of like we just want to see where they're made, and they're pretty much just in their 30 somethings, 40 somethings, salt and pepper, backwards hat and hoodies still. But in Germany, those are what drug dealers look like. Even though in our culture, it's like bros kind of a little bit sometimes. So they went to Germany and got pulled over like an insane amount of time because they matched the description. And they, for the first time, were like, oh shit, it really is like a thing. And I was like, yeah, you come to America, you look a little bit less employed or a little bit happy with your life. They'll figure out how to make that smile turn upside down.
Oh yeah. And then also, like, I'm sure you've had the same experience. Airports are fun. Um, you always get randomly searched and all that fun shit. So you just get used to it. And then threads block the density scanner, so even if you get scanned, they're still going to pat you down. So you might as well just be opt out and just go straight to the pat down. Plus, if you're going to pay all that money, you might as well get felt up, right? Like, I mean, shit.
Pay for people to touch you. It used to be called a massage,
right?
Yeah, if you ever thought that you didn't want people to touch your hair, don't get dreadlocks.
Yeah, everyone will come up and just touch them, especially drunk women.
Mm-hmm. Yank them right off your dome. I went to when I was a little bit younger, my sister was a bit older than me. I went to Buffalo, and I think there was like an Anything Goes dance club. And funny enough, that time I probably sounded like most sorority girls. I was like, I'm just here to dance. One of the rare times in my life. And I remember somebody pulled my dreadlocks like they were ringing a bell, and I swooped around just like, what the hell was that for? It was whiplash. They're just like, I just wanted to see if they were real. It's like you can ask the face questions that they're on. Like it's always an option. I think some lady actually grabbed them when I held the door during COVID. And it was just one of those things where I was like, I can't get you out of my hair. And I don't say that because it's a good thing. Right.
I think it's funny too. People always ask if they're real. And it's like, no, I have waist length dreads that are weave. Right. Like, and then you have like some women that have like really nice weaves and they're kind of like jealous because yours is long and real. I've had that happen too. Women get real mad at me for like no reason.
Samson style.
Yeah. It's just funny.
It's funny because your beard is almost getting to the same point where somebody's going to start yanking on that, I guess. Huh?
Oh, my beard used to be a lot longer, but I had a whole power tool incident that was almost really bad. So I keep it trimmed at least to a certain length now.
Funny enough, dreadlocks, when I first got them, were an answer to that same problem. I was in my early 20s, a machinist, and I had a pretty respectable fro. But every time you lean into a big machine, you're like, I can't tell how far out I am. And it doesn't take much to like torque your face off. So I went to dread, so I knew where it was. And then, of course, then the dreads got long enough where I believe at one job where I used to fix guitars, I burned more hair than soldering wire because it was just always flopping right into the soup. Every time you put your head down, just hair in your workspace.
Somebody else in chat says they always like to smoke a fat J so they reek while they patch you down at the airport. I do the same thing, my brother. Somebody else asked in chat if they could put labs in their aquaponic system. Yes, we actually dose lactobacillus to treat and do maintenance at 1 to 1,000 ratio, so 1 gallon per 1,000 gallons of system volume. Let me jump back to my questions here. What has been some of your most memorable episodes or topics that you've covered to date?
Ooh, well, I did a recent one. I wouldn't say memories that I want to keep, but I unfortunately got a dose of Omicron right after the new year, which took me out for a little bit. But I'd say in those moments, sometimes I'd rather capture the experience than wait until I'm like back to a professional level. It's a torture because I don't like the idea that just because you create things for the internet that like your personal life has to start to become part of it. But I felt, especially because I knew I was going to absolutely human test cannabis the whole time, that I might as well at least kind of take one for the team and just show sometimes an educated, sometimes an absolutely risky guess of like, dab's worth it when your upper respiratory is fucked up right now. Just to be able to not necessarily show the perfect try, but just a very human attempt at like, can you maintain comfort while going through some of these areas? So in that way, I really did enjoy being able to provide the view from the bottom as opposed to the view from the top. But for me, I'd say some of the recent interviews, I just talked to a guy, Jared Kesselman, and he's been working out West for 20 years. It was just amazing to hear the ideas from somebody who had already went through all of the shifts in personality and is this going to be my last job? Am I going to get blacklisted? All the way to like, now I have family and extended family who are going to know about it. And so to see somebody who had kind of went through, a whole generation of cannabis already and still working in it, it was for me very interesting because I'm 3, 4, 5 years into this market. From the employment side, 15 years from now, will I feel the same exuberance about all the topic matter? Will I feel just as encouraged to want to spread it? Or does politics and the slow growth of business beat you down a little bit? So it was awesome to hear that for most people. And what I would assume is the case is you sometimes just, it builds your passion even more, but you get to actually utilize it more effectively as opposed to just kind of yelling it out there and just hoping, you're not screaming in a vacuum. It felt like, he got into consulting. I saw that you do consulting as well. And it really does seem like the right area to think about the future of cannabis, really people helping people have an easier time than we might have getting into it. So that episode for me was a lot fulfilling, even being just a content creator or podcaster or in my job as a trainer, to know that it wasn't necessarily something that I was going to want to, abandon 10 years from now just because.
Yeah, I certainly didn't think after slinging it growing up, well, maybe not growing up, but certainly going from slinging eighths back in Philly, allegedly in this book I'm writing, to do what I do now. I mean, shit, I got a chance to go to Jamaica. I'll be going back to Jamaica here later in the year. And then also to Africa. We'll be headed back to Africa at some point this year as well. So like really kind of going from, small, small scale growing to traveling the world doing this stuff. It's really awesome to kind of, never would have thought, certainly never thought I'd be living in Oklahoma at any point in my life. I'll tell you that.
I haven't been to too many places, but I have been to Oklahoma and I have been to Kansas a lot. My dad was a military guy. And so I just remember staring out of a Four Seasons motel at a Food Lion. I would have, though age inappropriate, but definitely the perfect time to just smoke weed and look at cornfields because there's not a whole lot else. And I'm just used to the rolling hills of PA, like you can't imagine how flat it is sometimes in other areas of the country.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know if you went up to the Poconos, I used to trap hawks up by Wind Gap. I used to band them. So that was, they have quite the little mountain range there in Pennsylvania. Not huge, but they're not little either.
Yeah, we got dumped on pretty nice. I think actually, because you mentioned you were traveling in it, did you get caught in the most recent snowstorm, I guess, that went across the country?
I kind of flew in it was freezing rain when I landed, enough to where the back door of the car was frozen shut. So it was already started, and I'll tell you what, he braked real early on that runway in case he started sliding and needed more, because I've never stopped about halfway down a runway before like he did that. That was definitely a new experience, but yeah, it was definitely a bit of a crosswind and quite a bit of turbulence landing, that's for sure.
I was glad it hit here, but only did about 3 to 6 inches. However, the middle of the state, and this time, that vein, they got like dumped like a foot to 2 feet. Showing once again, they're not the biggest mountains, but you don't want to get lost up there. And the Allegheny or the Appalachian Mountain Trail is it's a thing.
Oh yeah, I hiked a whole lot of the Appalachian Trail there. And it's a really, really wonderful place that people don't really talk about a whole lot on the East Coast. People talk about how beautiful the West is, but the East has got a lot of amazing forests as well that are still preserved. And shoot, I go down to Georgia and there's a whole bunch of northern Georgia is permanently preserved as basically forest land and will never be built on. So it's beautiful down there. Yeah, I think it's definitely a treasure that people don't talk about enough in the East. Everyone talks about going down the shore, but not, mountains, and they're beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, it's some of the things I think that I wouldn't say completely miss. I mean, I'm always going to like being on the more legal side of cannabis, but sort of when you're younger and it was more legal, having to find places, and it was usually always places that were more natural than human, because you didn't want to run into authority figures. So I think, some of the greatest experiences of exploration were, hey, we absolutely want to consume this form a crop circle and get crazy, but like let's journey out away from where humans have really touched as often, and you get to see things whether or not they were real, but imagine sometimes and have experiences. I think that cemented in that same feeling of curiosity. Sometimes now it's like just go outside and smoke weed instead of inside. Why? It's like it's just nice to change the setting.
So you had touched on a little CBD trial that you did on yourself. Do you want to touch on that and kind of what maybe a synopsis on the results? That was a cool episode.
Oh yeah, no, thanks for bringing that in. I would say that more like a lot of folks, CBD is like a awesome cousin of THC that I'm sure you want to meet, but I already know THC, so like it's all right. CBD can be over there, and I don't mind when it's mixed in. I've always enjoyed CBD strains. I think in our state we have Harlequin, Alien Rock Candy, Martian Monkey, and Harlessu come out from time to time that have some CBD mixed in, but it's probably 5% of the market at the absolute most. So like a lot of folks, I'm a THC 95% of the time user. A company had contacted me called Chill Frog CBD, and they said, hey, do you want to kind of just do some affiliate marketing? And for me, in the cannabis world, you really can't monetize very often. It violates every policy on every social media. So was excited at least to get the opportunity to start working with some business. And hopefully we'll get the chance to talk to one of their extractors as well, just to learn more. So I said, yeah, but I got to test it. I don't think it's fair to sell things you don't use. And I have no intention of doing that ever in anything that I do, hopefully moving forward. So I grabbed a month's supply and ran myself through it and had my theory exactly as to what might happen. I'd heard plenty of things, taught plenty of med pros about, the potential of CBD, and they had taught me even more. And then ran through November of this past year of 2021, taking just one 33 milligram CBD gummy a day. I think these had melatonin added to them in a small form to try to help with your sleep cycle. Melatonin is I think it actually is the only unregulated hormone in the United States. So, hormone doesn't necessarily mean scary thing, but it doesn't always work the way it's intended for every biology and every pathology. So for me, I knew there was going to be a test to it, but love human testing. I ran through it with 4 other people I knew, my wife, my mom, and my best friend and his wife. So that way I knew nobody was going to lie about the results or tell me, oh yeah, it was great because you're Scott and I just want to give you support. I really wanted to know, diet changes, digestional changes, sleep patterns, pain, inflammation, thought process, emotional intelligence, anything that might change. And I think just because I'm one who tries to pay attention and push things as far as I can, I may have gotten some of the greatest benefit. My wife got a similarly amazing benefit. And then the other 2 folks who did it actually got a benefit, but it was more interruptive because their schedule is about raising their kid. So they can't always do what's best for their health. Like most parents understand, it's a sacrifice. But for me, I thought maybe I'd sleep a little bit better. Maybe I'd be, a little less aggravated from the pain in my body from like a lifelong back injury from breakdancing. So I earned it the right way, at least. But unfortunately, or I'd say fortunately, it blew away everything I thought CBD could do. It had really mended this tension I could not relieve in my body on my left side, which at this point had been 2 straight decades, unquestionably changed my sleep, sitting, standing, laying down, and had really complicated life in a way that at this point I was just fine with. I'd accepted, sort of like it wasn't so bad I could say it was crippling, but it's just because I know there's people who's dealing with a lot worse. So it freed up just so much energy. My sleep improved. I even felt that there was areas of my emotionality and response that I was able to sort of access with a truer energy, as opposed to just react. Even if you're mature, your reactions might be practiced, but to really be able to get in there and move around the tiny pieces of exactly like how your personality might function or how you might learn certain things was incredible. That journey into self-analysis of the mind. Also just unexpected, because I just thought it was, it's calming. I'd probably done a max test of 2,000 milligrams of CBD in a day. And yeah, it just feels like you're waiting to go to sleep sort of in the corner of your thinking. It wasn't anything to write home about. So knowing the more vitamin approach to it of a consistent everyday use was sort of just under perception. I still use it at this point. I've pretty much took like a 2-week break and immediately realized there was nothing worth trying because the benefits were so incredible and had improved my lifestyle living plus I'd looked for without really the inebriating side, because I could still use THC. And the one thing I'd say to anybody who might feel that that's interesting enough to try, generally they say CBD blocks THC, and you might have to dose higher forms of THC to be able to kind of deal with that defense. And it reset a lot of my tolerance. Like I was probably, 6 months from a good tea break. No need. I could take CBD and just get on way higher in a very strange, but ultimately synergistic way. So in that, it really did tell there's a lot more to the entourage that even I had understood, knowing most of the modern science, pretty well. And to me, that meant you really can't guess it. It helps in such amazing ways.
It's really good to hear. You also covered CBN a little bit, which I think is something that people need to learn more about. And I think is kind of a good kind of replacement for melatonin in some cases, but can be very, very good for, I know when I get really bad back pain and stuff, sometimes once in a while, that shit helps me a lot for actually getting to sleep. But I do fear it can be abused if it was dosed in high doses, especially if someone wasn't aware of that's what they were taking. I think, the potential for abuse there is there. And it's definitely something I worry about with some of the CBN products. I know we always intentionally only do 5 milligrams per gram by volume, because if you take enough to really put yourself down, you're going to know that you ate a lot of volume of something, right? And I think that's kind of a good safety mechanism for people making those products. But what did you have any other interesting findings in your show on that?
Yeah, I found that for what seems to be a lot of folks like yourself who are really aware of what cannabinoids can do, we all kind of feel like CBN is that, like, a very, very great sleep aid, and potent enough where, yeah, if you get your ratios off, a little bit can really send you over. It's interesting. I think when you look online, you do not find nearly as much recommendation in that way. It seems, they haven't really found the right rat to be able to give CBN to, but it's, I think a lot of the testing that they really try to do in cannabis is to create responsibility, to fight against the idea that it's safe as people think it is. For some reason, science hates thinking that it could actually be safer than not. And CBN is one of the ones where I think in our market, there are I probably can't say no. I think there's like 2 CBN products. So it's been underutilized from a product standpoint. I see a lot more out in the West. Do you see products that are stronger than the 5 milligram per gram that you guys formulate out?
Oh yeah, there's some very, in my opinion, recklessly dosed products in Oklahoma. I mean, you used to be able to get 4,500 milligram chocolate bars. I think they limited to 1,000 milligrams now. But it used to be like, unless you have like back surgery recently or something, like, you don't need a 4,200 milligram chocolate bar. Like, what 4,500 milligram chocolate bar? Like, that's just, come on. Like, I get why people do it, but like, who's eating that? That, like, unless you're in a ton of pain or something else. I know when I hurt my back, I twisted my sacrum and my spine, and my pulled all my rib heads out on my left side just about, and I was taking 3,000 milligrams a day, but I didn't take any opioids. They gave me a prescription for it, and I was like, I'm not going on that shit. I don't want to take that shit. And that got me through. And then I was able to drop after about 2 or 3 weeks down to 2,000 milligrams a day, and then slowly like get down to 200, 500, and 250 and all that. But it took a while, and that I get, and that's why I still think there always needs to be a medical program that allows these higher dosage stuff, but not 4,000 milligrams. I think that anything. Do you really need more than 1,000 milligrams in a thing? You don't. Come on.
Yeah, that's so out of balance for the body. Like that's going to create other problems with longevity. Like if you keep at that, you might just stop producing cannabinoids on your own, because that's just, even if that was CBD, that would be like just too much. Outside of, as you said, really injury treatment.
And then the other thing too, like Canada went the other extreme, right? The legal limit for Canada for edibles is 10 milligrams per dose, right? So, like, that's too low. Right? That's crazy. Like, what are you doing?
It's a tickle.
If you do a lot of bioavailability stuff with it, you can still make it hit enough for most people to feel it, but that's just way too low. And if you're a medical patient, that's not going to do shit. Where you're going to take like $300 worth per dose just because they want to make it all in 10 milligram packages, and then all the plastic and all the packaging, and it's just no fucking reason for it. It's just crazy.
Oh, I agree. It's funny. I recently just bought some animal CBD. I'm about to run my cat through a secondary trial. We did the omegas and it went well. So now let's see how CBD does for her hips. And it was like $50 for a 125 milligram bottle. And so I was like, okay, let me just assume that there's a formulation where you added in pet specific things, or naturally, I'm just hoping, more than anything else. And it's just a binder, like MCT and cannabis oil. And I very quickly was like, although I wouldn't want to necessarily give my animals medical products that are designed for human consumption, I don't believe the design means anything between these. They just mixed it into a vehicle and sold it at like a 4 times premium of what you could buy in any other market because it's pets and you put cute images on it. And I felt once again the sting of like marketing versus medicine.
Crazy too. I mean, shit. The last time I bought bulk CBD, it was like 700 a pound or 700 a kilo for the isolate. So like that's 1,000 grams.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crumbs that they were really fishing out of it. And so I was like, all right, just the one time because it said it, but now I'm just going to make my own formulations, as I know I should have, just to at least test that theory. But wasn't the same. Felt a little bit strange, knowing that it's should be very cheap.
You also touched on some of the other interesting episodes that you had on your show. Is you touched on some interesting receptor stuff. I guess the first one I'll ask you about is you touched on the TRVP1 receptor. Can you tell us a bit about that? I haven't heard anyone really do much coverage on that, and I thought that was something kind of cool and unique to your show. I wanted to touch on.
Yeah, it's probably my favorite. I mean, it's not a cannabinoid receptor, but the TRPV1, it's like transvelanin cation channel version receptor 1. They do seem to pay by the letter. But it's also known really as the capsaicin receptor. And in the way that, cannabis oil, THC, CBD, and things like that, as we know, come from the cannabis trichomes. In a hot pepper, the thing that makes hot peppers hot and irritants, the thing that is in pepper spray when you spray other people is the seed oil usually that comes from hot peppers, which is capsaicin. At a time I worked in a restaurant, Lee's Hoagie House that was near us. They would kind of add capsaicin depending on how hot you wanted your wings. So it wasn't a different pepper. It was actually just pure hot pepper oil. It's clear, odorless, very, very irritating thing. And when I started doing some studying into receptor science, and me not being necessarily a med pro, I realized, it's very hard to understand exactly what the target is of this information. It's written so complexly, and it's written in a way where it's just explorative. So you're always wondering what the application would be. And is there a way I could potentially make this really land in my personal life? Because I want to use these things. I want to use them to be able to hopefully benefit my habits or my behaviors or, my health ultimately. So, CB1 and CB2 seem to really take up a lot of space, and you can find some information about the human endocannabinoid system, and you'll find CB3, I think what they call GPR55, and you'll find information about even what they theorize as CB4 and CB5, although we're years behind human testing in any of the situation due to the federal laws. So then off in the corner, I see that capsaicin is used as a medical treatment. There's like an over-the-counter thing, or it might be a prescribed one called capsaicin, I believe, spelled a little differently. And being a hot pepper fan and a hot foods fan, I'd run into the whole Scoville units measuring system of jalapenos to ghost peppers. And I finally thought that maybe, now that this TRPV1 receptor was in my view, maybe there's a way I could actually figure out if all this information is true, if it makes sense, because reading on it really just makes you feel like you're memorizing things. You're not really understanding them. So lo and behold, it said that certain cannabinoids go to the TRPV1 receptor and change how it operates. But the weirdest thing I thought when I read about what that receptor is responsible for, receptors are multifunctional switches. It's less like a doorbell and more like an iPhone home button, where it can do many things depending on what the screen wants, right? It can open a program or close it. It can, turn off your phone or wake it back up. So it all kind of depends on what you're doing as far as what it's going to do to you. And I had probably spent enough time as a teenager, getting into a great headspace and eating the hottest wings we could afford just to see if we would survive. And it always seemed that cannabis was a factor as far as, our endurance of that heat and our ability to really sustain whether or not we could take it. So I did a little bit of a test on the TRPV1 receptor where we ate the hottest chip in the world, the hot chip challenge by the company Packy, though they did not pay us anything for it. And I felt a bit of fright because it seems that cannabis can go to that receptor and change its behavior, but this had not really been anything that I could find any other information on. They had not really tested cannabis and hot peppers quite yet. So it's years away. And so my theory was, if you eat really hot food and then use cannabis, can it bail you out of a bad situation? And I was surprised to see that the interactions that were described on these websites in thick language did come to fruition. And much like the CBD trial, it actually worked a whole lot better than I would have thought. We literally had like a big old trash can right next to me. And the gentleman, Steve, I did it with, just in case we puked, because we thought this could go really south. We are eating the hottest chip filled with the hottest peppers in the world. And that's got to mean something, even if it's just for the internet a little bit. And so we tried everything. I think we used a salve that was non-transdermal, a couple rollables and bowlables. We had a little RSO tincture with us made by Moxie at the time. We also had preloaded Puffco Peak so we can get a quick dab in there. And we started after, I think, 1 solid minute of waiting. And every single type of cannabis we used alleviated the pain and irritation measurably and additively to the next one. Initially your lips are just feeling like a scorpion pepper stain you in the corner of your mouth, and a little bit of salve on there. You looked a little ridiculous, but you were just down to like vinegar levels of heat, from like Pete's hot sauce, Texas Pete. As soon as our throat started to burn and every little puff on the blunt would alleviate the burden a little bit or distract it, and the dabs would double down on the throat side of it. A little RSO tincture swig, and all of a sudden your teeth weren't hot anymore and your gums weren't irritated. And I think by about 3.5 minutes in, we were both just on a route to a very, very thick high and not feeling too bothered. We went about 22 minutes without drinking or eating anything. All we did is use cannabis. And at that point, we were, I think, so elevated and so hungry that we just ended it there and said, fuck it. You know what? I had bagels and cream cheese just in case it got too hot. The real intense version of cookies and milk, and some bonbons and cream puffs. And I think we just ended up enjoying them instead of having to bail out. So for me, once again, that kind of live testing, that human approach is what I'm all about. And a couple of weird things on the TRPV1, because dab sweats are a thing, right? And some people do run into them. If you take a couple healthy dabs, sometimes all of a sudden you erupt in sweat, although usually using cannabis kind of drops the body temperature initially a little bit. And this was something that I thought was a really weird phenomenon. And it really seems to be that capsaicin receptor. It makes you sweat when you're stressed, when you work out and you get hot, when it's hot outside, and when you dab really, really hard. It seems that you just hit that one switch and it starts to let the water and saline out of your body. So for me, that kind of experiment especially was really fun. One of my favorite episodes too, because when you can really utilize the information practically in life, I now know that if you ever just hit me with pepper spray, just find me some marijuana, my friend. I'll be good in about 3.5 minutes.
The reason to bring your Puffco to the protest,
Speaking of. Yeah,
awesome.
An absolute good reason too.
You actually mentioned my other follow-up question to the stuff that I wanted to touch on, because again, you do have some really cool, unique content on your show. Is one of the reasons why I want to get you on. You touched on the CB3 and CB5, and CB4 and possibly CB5 receptors. Can you tell us a bit more about that? That's really interesting and something that I had never heard of before listening to your content.
Yeah, so CB1 and CB2 are pretty much the ketchup and mustard of cannabis right now, and they have been studied for quite a few years. But human testing is, of course, always going to be a bit distant. So, after looking at enough data, I ran across what they call the G protein receptor group. It is what the cannabinoid receptors are. There's apparently 4 overall types of receptors, but the biggest one that we especially focus on are the G protein ones, since they are the cannabinoid focused ones. And after reading enough about CB1 and CB2, they say CB1 is kind of the head nervous system, CB2 is more the gut-ish, but they're everywhere. I started to read about these orphan receptors, as they call them, receptors that are uncategorized, sort of, they don't really know where to put them as far as their functionality, but they understand a little bit about where they are, or a little bit about how they contribute to our bodies. And GPR55, G protein receptor number 55, has been studied quite a bit, and it seems to be a place that cannabis likes to go. But they always say that it isn't that it goes there that matters, it's that if it primarily goes there, if it's its home receptor. And so, as probably over the last 3 or 4 years, GPR55 kind of went from the theoretical CB3 to what a lot of things now say are, yeah, we pretty much accept it as the CB3 receptor. And now they're modeling what CB4 and CB5 might be. What a lot of this, I think, comes from isn't so much them kind of, taking a cell and picking little freckles off of it to see what they do. They seem to finally be embracing the idea that the endocannabinoid system is like an actual part of our health. A lot of people describe it as the conductor. If all of our organs are players in that band and that orchestra, the ECS is what makes them all work together well. So imagine if your car broke its timing belt. Everything's still working, but in no way with the other systems, and then your car eventually overheats. And in our bodies, it seems that cannabis really is helping manage the dance between all of our organs and how they act and when they need to act. And so as they kind of started looking at the whole system, it wasn't so much of them picking little receptors as them actually starting to look at our endocannabinoids and just figuring out where they're going, and then actually valuing those spots. So things like 2-AG, things like anandamide, they started chasing those a little bit and taking a little more seriously where they ended up. And so now in some writing, you can see, the GPR receptors that they're classifying all the way up to CB5. They don't have a great idea of like, well, if it does X here, it does Y over here, but they seem to be assigning other categories because they realize CB1 and CB2 do not explain nearly as much of the complexity of the experience. So they realized, yeah, maybe we need more keys on this keyboard. We can't just type this story with just 5 letters.
Well, that, and like there's certain things that you can add to cannabis too that seem to have a dramatic effect on uptake as well. I know there's 2 different things that I've worked with that, and I'm not talking about lecithins and things like that. I'm talking about like other herbs that have compounds in it. That there's a compound. Hold on, let me find the name of it.
Yeah, I've actually had some experiences with some really like raw teas, like ones where it's just ground up and thrown in, and had like, oh, I don't feel like this is just marijuana affecting me in this moment, dosing and drinking some high quality teas at the same time. Rose hips, I feel honestly can put you into a state.
I'm trying to find I know the plant, but I'm trying to find the compound because I'd rather discuss the compound here in 2 seconds. But there's a specific plant that actually has a really interesting synergistic effect with cannabis that can make 10 or 20 milligrams just hit you like 250 milligrams. Like it just obliterates the shit out of you. The same way that like a lot of people don't realize SSRIs can be highly synergistic with cannabinoids and increase cannabinoid uptake. The other one that people often don't find out until they do this accidentally is antihistamines. A lot of antihistamines will actually increase cannabinoid uptake as well and make you really high. If you're like broke as shit, you take a Benadryl and you smoke your blunt of mids, you will be high as shit.
Seems to open it right up.
Oh yeah. I think it's interesting. We don't understand any of that. I think that there's next to no literature on those types of topics. Even milk derived, if you take kefir and you add like a cannabis oil or cannabis base to it, it will fuck you up a lot more than that same milligram otherwise would. That's like another that you can make all kinds of cool like fruity kefirs that are really good for you, but it'll get you fucking lit for your workout. It's really good.
Yeah, looking up only really briefly because I remember one of the times I'd taken CBD randomly. I had like a super strange night. I dabbed up, drank some rose hip laden tea, and then looking up rose hips just on the medical side. It's a good source of vitamin C, also great for osteoarthritis and pain after surgery, other conditions as well, but no good scientific evidence to support. So naturally, we got to test ourselves. But it was very introspective. I would say reminiscent of like, indica style terpene feeling, kind of couch locked in a chair, just asking the weirdest questions, exploring parts of the mind, whether or not you want to. And was one of those things where I realized, there's something to be done here. And in that same, I thought immediately, I'm making tea. I'm just putting plants that have a lot of terpene content into hot water at decarboxylation temperature. And then I remove the plant mat. I'm just extracting terps, man. Like at the end of the day, it just made me feel like I've just been doing this without cannabis involved since I was a kid, just adult tea.
I think someone's gonna make a mids and Benadryl meme talking about it in chat. Anyways, it's just like an old ghetto thing we used to do back in the day. Like whatever, not everybody had money all the time when they were young. Like,
I mean, that's why we got into salvia. We mentioned before we got on, like we were like, oh man, we got like some high mids, and then somebody's mentioned salvia is up in in New Hope at the time, and we went it and started to like mix it down, and it did get you a different headspace. I wouldn't say you were higher, but you were definitely in a different zone than you were on just mids.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a couple of cool, actually there's multiple, I don't know if they're still open, but there used to be multiple really cool apothecary shops, and they would have like any herb that you wanted, like shit you've never fucking heard of. And if you wanted an herb, you could just put it in order and they could get it in, like fucking anything. So if you wanted to brew up something crazy, or you want to work on some experiment, or you want to, work on some synthesis or something, you could get damn near anything you want to do. It was wonderful.
Got to explore. I feel like there's one in Ambler, which is not too far from me. And yeah, she is absolutely an expert in a lot of those. Like, what is that called? 72X12? Is that a Russian flower? Like, all right, yeah, I'm into that. Finding really just bringing back ancient medicine to the modern world.
Yeah, it was also really cool too. If you wanted to make your own herbal medicines, you could actually get access to most of the shit that you needed in one stop without, if you find out someone's sick or something, you could just run down there, grab the shit you needed, and come back and make your stuff, and then run it over to them. And it was just really, really good. Someone mentioned pine needle tea. You have to be very careful with pine needle tea and make sure you get the right type of pine tree. Not every type of pine tree is actually, some of them are actually quite toxic if you do that. The general rule of thumb is you want pine trees. So imagine that this branch is the needle. You want to have single needles. If you have the double needles with the same connection point, those are the ones you want to avoid. Those are that family and that group is the ones that have that and that are poisonous. So really good for vitamin C, but make sure you pick it from the right type of pine tree, or you can have a bad experience. I used to teach a lot of herbalism. And definitely was one of the rules of thumb that we would teach people.
There's a pine barrens honey that I was able to get from a local apiary, and it was from Jersey Pine Barrens. Naturally, they unfortunately stopped selling it, but we still had a little bit left, and it was literally, I think my wife had a headache and one spoonful, because I mentioned like, pine's a bronchodilator. You just got to get it through like a good source and good bioavailability, and boom, immediately sinuses cleared up and her headache went away. And I was like, well, the power of appropriate pining.
Yeah, so the highest pining that I've ever had so far was definitely in Zimbabwe. There's some stuff in the hills there on the border with Mozambique up in Nyanga that was really, really piney, like crazy piney. But they're all longer flowering sativas. So that wouldn't work too great in that climate where you are. But maybe in the pine barrens doesn't really freeze until real late. But maybe the Jersey Devil will come steal your crop.
I'm sure one of them would. Yeah, I actually the strain I have loaded up in my Puffco tonight is some Thai sap, and it is limonene pinene dominant, which is my personal. Usually, I find limonene terpinolene. For whatever reason, PA comes out after the summer with like really high terpinolene extracts and strains. It just seems to dominate. I don't know if it's just moist indoor growing conditions or what, but you can't get away from it. And in our first year, it was a lot more. You're either going to get myrcene bombs or you're going to get these like lemon pinene mixtures, which seem to have kind of went by the wayside a little bit. But I know for me, even if I don't know the genetics, those are the labs that get me the most excited. And osamine, of course, but they barely test for it in PA.
Yeah, it is so strange to me how different the testing is from state to state. It really is bizarre that, the variance in it. And the other thing too is like, I still can't believe that they haven't done something on the federal level. It will be one of the things that, and I kind of almost dread that happening, and I think a lot of people do. But I think one of the benefits of it is we'll have federal standards for testing. So we'll have good baselines. What questions did you have for me? I know you talked to the beginning that you had a couple of questions yourself. Give me 2 seconds to let my dogs in, but I can hear you. It's just over there out of camera view.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the one thing when you first contacted me that I was interested in hearing from you, you've been running your podcast for 2 to 3 times longer than I've been in the media side of things. And I was wondering at this phase, I mean, if you almost had 300 episodes, that's an incredible library of information you've created. Does it feel different than when you started, when you approach it now? Does it feel like you have more support? Like what are the things that you think about now versus then? Is it still yelling in a vacuum, or does it feel like you're sometimes hitting the game-winning score kind of thing when you're producing content and putting it out?
Sure. So the show has definitely evolved. I think we had a much more structured show in the beginning. We had segments that we tried to do all the time. And that just took a lot of time to put together and all that. And then also, we had a lot more panelists in the beginning. And I think that it was kind of fun when we did it, but I think I kind of like having just 1 or 2 side panelists now and having a smaller group of people that are a little more experienced with these type of interviews. We normally have Fumidor. He's busy this evening, but normally Fumidor is with us. He has his own show, a product table, really awesome show on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. That is very experienced. Also, he has like a radio voice, so that kind of helps too. And then Marty is usually on the show, and then sometimes he has to step out for the kiddos and stuff. But he's on the show. Him and I have been doing the show for a long time, but we kind of limited down the number of guests. Sometimes Coot joins us. Clackamas Coot will join us on as a side panelist too. But I think I like it having more one-on-one interviews with just the guests, hyper focused on the topic. Sometimes we'll have a little bit of runoff at the end, or we'll kind of jam out with the stuff. But I think we used to have a much more panel atmosphere, and I think that kind of sometimes wasn't the best with some of the guests. I think it works better with this format. So that was one thing that's changed. 2, I think now I'm much more able to, I kind of have a bunch of different ideas for questions and kind of think about the interviews differently. So it's a little easier. Like I need you to do a little bit of background on people I don't know, but if I already know someone really well, half the time I hardly have anything written beforehand, but I already in my head have a bunch of questions, or since the last time I've talked to, I've heard them talk about different stuff on their shows, and we'll just kind of run through a bunch of cool shit. Or, hey, I know they're an expert on this one thing and they love talking about it. So, and people are interested in that thing, and just let them run. I think that's the other thing too, is finding good guests, and it's almost like looking at how well they are as a guest as well. I think some people, there's 1 or 2 people I can think of that are super brilliant, but they're just not good at all in terms of, you kind of have to really pull stuff out of them. It makes the different interviews not very good. So we've, I wouldn't have them on as a guest, but they're highly knowledgeable. Whereas other people like Coot or Dr. Efron or some of these other guys, you ask them one question and 45 minutes later you ask the next question. It's like it's really, really nice to just hear someone's train of thought and a full way of thinking on a topic, or asking experts on something that's kind of just way off in a different side field. I like to kind of combine, I love to combine KNF and aquaponics and living soil, or using aquaculture just to irrigate large scale living soil. We've seen a huge increase in microbial and yield. There's a bunch of slides. If you look at the Quilitas presentation from the Aquaponics conference, she has a bunch of slides on exact comparisons, but they were seeing 50% increase in yields in some cases, and a 17% increase in terpenes, and a 37%, and I forget what the other percentage was, increase in THC. Like really, really dramatic increases in yields. Hold on, do I have that? Yeah, here, I'll throw it up because I think I have those slides. Yeah, I do. Hold on, I can put the exact numbers up. And this is All credit to Danielle up at Equilitas. They're one of the Canadian companies.
It's funny
Here you
too,
go.
if you just develop a product that does that, you'd charge people more for those kind of gains per product, obviously. So
There you go. So in the one side by side, this is a compost. They just ran the regular water and then compost and really good, rich, super soil, living super soil. So they had a 3.7% increase and a 20.4% increase in THC, 14.3% increase in terpenes, and 16.1% increase in terpenes. Again, this is against living soil versus with and without aquaponic nutrients. So that's the only difference. But this wasn't in aquaponics. This was using it in soil. And then dry weight yielded square foot was 37.1% and 21.3%. And then total dry yield was 53% and 20% increase. So that's a huge difference.
yeah, that is
Across the board.
It's a whole different outcome. Yeah. Damn, 53%.
Right?
Holy moly. So since I know that aquaponics is based in fish soil, do you theorize or have you ever run into any other type of nutrient base, since I know fish is the base of this one, that you think might do even better than fish? Or do you feel that that's probably one of the best sources at this point?
So if I was strictly using it for fertilizer, I think the one other good contender, although it's a little bit harder to run larger systems with them and collect the waste right away, but shrimp systems, crayfish and stuff like that have a very well-rounded plant waste. The problem is that I can't run them in a closed loop because the potassium levels and stuff that we run for cannabis is way outside of their range and just wouldn't work. It would kill them. So cool if you're going to do decoupled or just separate the fish waste and irrigate with it. Wonderful, probably even better than fish. But fish, especially if you diversify your fish species a little bit, really do have a really good base that can give you, the vast majority of the nutrients you need. You still occasionally have to boost a little bit of your micronutrients. Silica, calcium, and iron will all have to be, get depleted by the plants, or in iron's case, oxidized. It has to be available in that bioavailable form. Although Quan Fem has been working on some interesting plant ferments for iron and having really good success. If you check out episode 251, he's running his systems mainly on plant ferments now without any mineral inputs, which is really interesting and intriguing, especially for third world aquaponic production. Really interested in finding more information about that. We're working on the Open Nutrient Project and stuff like that to try and get more info out on that. In fact, do I have this? I do. There we go. So, fuck. Too many slides. Too many slides. There we go. There's the Open Nutrient Project. If anyone wants information on that, shoot me an email. We're currently looking for participants that can contribute, and then we're going to put this out publicly here soon in either a website format or in the database and the website format as well. But we have a huge Excel sheet running now that's massive. There's a fuck ton of data in it. Yeah, you can see here different plant groups by ppm's content for different nutrients. So potassium, phosphorus, whatever, all the different plant stuff that's in there as well, all the links to all the original source data, as well as test kits, so how to test for all of it in soil or aquatics, so that you can figure out what you actually created and kind of give people all the information in one space, because then people can make their own fertilizers and then they don't need people like Monsanto anymore. They can do their own stuff. But this helps people like my friends in Zimbabwe and my friends all over in Jamaica and everywhere else. We can continue to add plant species to this and build it out and build it out and build it out and actually confirm what a lot of these nutrient parts per million numbers are and average it out across different collections. And then we truly can kind of unlock a lot of this kind of knowledge, especially with plant ferments and FPJs and the liquid IMO plant ferments that Chris and I talked about recently with Fem and some of the other cool things. This is really kind of the solution, I think, to a lot of this, especially nations that don't have a ton of food, not just for soil, but aquaponics as well. Doesn't matter, the nutrients are bioavailable just the same. It's good for both. I think there's certain plants that are definitely going to end up not being good for this, but the vast majority are perfectly fine for this type of application. So it really is kind of an interesting project I've been working on and putting together for quite a while, and something that will be almost ready to show off publicly here soon. We're a little bit behind because it's been kind of a wacky month or two, but we've made a huge amount of progress on this database, and it's massive right now, and I'm excited to share it soon with everybody. But if you're looking to contribute, shoot me an email, anybody listening, and we'll get you a link to that.
So if I can ask, because especially knowing that you have that much vision and this has that much application, even though obviously cannabis is a big motivator in this, it goes beyond that, obviously, with a lot of things when you're just dealing with plants in general. So I'm sure it's been frustrating that you've had to run into some social media BS as far as violation of community guidelines and standard sorts of things, because cannabis is a part of what you talk about. Video is something I'm about to get into. I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm sorry, it cut out. I thought you stopped. I apologize. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries. So I just, I'd been doing something on YouTube through my previous company, but it's something under my own brand for it, the U.S. Chamber of Cannabis, and I'm about to launch it. I'm also about a month or two behind of where I wanted to be for it, for some tech issues that I ran into, but I'm really looking forward to it. And then in the same respect, looking forward to getting shadow banned potentially, or, yanked for violating standards. So I was wondering, since you are ahead of me in those games, especially, have you been banned a bunch? Has it been more of an uphill battle? Does it feel like it's against you, kind of thing?
Oh yeah, I'm pretty much always suspended on something. Instagram has definitely pegged me once in a while. I never had my account lost, but I've certainly, whatever, given me a warning. Facebook, I always have one of my accounts in some level of suspension, because you can't post pretty much anything on there now without getting some kind of shit for it. What else?
Has YouTube
I
been
don't know.
friendly?
YouTube is damn near axed my channel multiple times, and it wasn't until I finally, honest to God, once I hit 10,000 subscribers, suddenly I got treated with a little bit of respect. When I emailed them and said, hey, can you take down these fucking things? Like, this is bullshit. Like, here's the link to the actual website that you're telling me is in violation. One of them was Mammoth P. Like, Mammoth P is not in violation of any of their protocols. Don't flag me for that. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, there was just bullshit, because I had a link to Mammoth P's website. And then I don't remember, there's a bunch of like silly shit like that they said was in violation. And I was like, this is ridiculous. But when we hosted the first Aquaponic Cannabis conference, I almost lost my channel because I had the different people that donated goods for us to give out in there. And it was like Mammoth P and Recharge and a couple of others. And like half of the sponsorship got flagged as, whatever. So that's definitely something you can get yourself into trouble in really easily. That's why almost all our guests, I just put their social media links on there, because that doesn't seem to get us flagged. I wish I could put their actual websites and stuff on there. I try to put it in chat. I try to show you guys the website during the episode and the video, but I have to be careful about putting links in the description, because it jeopardizes the channel, and I wish it wasn't that way, but that's certainly a thing. But audio wise, I host my stuff on SoundCloud because they're really tolerant of cannabis content. So, and then the RSS feed feeds out to everything else, and it makes it simple. If they want to ban me from their podcast thing, then it's fine, but they don't take it down. It's just not distributing on that one platform or whatever. But I think we're on over 500 platforms now. I think in total that this RSS feed feeds out to for it. So that's one of those things you just have to sit down and spend a rainy day just plugging in your RSS and all the different sites. But other than that, just like, I don't know, as far as the social media stuff, like, it's cool to like go back and forth with people, but go back and forth with people that are intelligent enough to have a conversation about that. If it's just some muppet who's just like blindly just trolling you or something, just fucking ban them and ignore it. It's no sense in you just like spending 3 or 4 hours arguing with someone that's, of low intelligence. Now, if someone is highly intelligent, they can be some of the best people to run ideas off of. They're great people. there's a couple of people that I'm sure consider themselves trolls to me that are wonderful. If I come up with something, it's nice to have them poke holes in it and shit that maybe I don't see or think of. That could be a consequence of a given idea or design. It's good. Use them. They're like a free thing to test ideas on and to sharpen your own ideas on. Like, use them to that advantage. Like, absolutely. But if someone's clearly like making up bullshit, like some of the shit that definitely was going on Instagram today on well, I won't mention where, but there was definitely some comical level bullshit on Instagram, not on my channel, but on somebody else's channel. It was a good friend of mine, of people just pulling shit out of their ass and making ridiculous claims about insect stuff. You know, there's just I don't understand where you can't, there's no point in wasting time with someone that's like that far out of reality, right? It's just dumb. So I think that's kind of one other thing too, where like just learning to like not let that shit get to you and to just make good content and to just, you know, rather than sitting there arguing with someone, go record another good episode, go book a better guest that it's going to be interesting. And, you know, people, you know, that's far better than just sitting there and whining back and forth with people. And certainly something that, you know, I certainly have gotten myself into trouble with in the past. I'll fully admit that. But, you know, other thing too, like sometimes you got to be careful what your guests say. I've definitely gotten some shit for some stuff my guests have said as well. And that can also get you into trouble. So being mindful of that, I guess, a little bit, but most of the time that's not too much of a problem. Let me think, what else on the podcast stuff? Just trying to like network with other podcasters, and then after a while you just kind of get to make friends with people and get into cool events and do fun stuff and see new things and you were just talking about going to see a big commercial grow for the first time. Why don't you tell us about that, because that's something that I was kind of neat to hear about earlier before we went online.
Oh yeah. I'd say up to this point, you know, I probably had, even though with cannabis for over 20 years, you know, I've probably seen a lot of purple closets and a lot of small tents in like the corners of rooms that wives tolerated or, you know, was able to be hidden from RAs and stuff like that. But I went to see a big old grow for Agrikind. It took like 3 hours. It was so big. It was incredible. All indoor. Funny enough, you know, the smells were so varied because like when you're outside of the room and then per room and at each stage of growth, it was just great to see that a lot of the information that I always had in pictures and in theory did make sense. Although of course it was made sense of for me. It wasn't like you can call out everything as you see it. But in the hallways, it smelled like the inside of a pumpkin. Like when you're cleaning it during you know, Halloween season, if you will, and there's like a very wet kind of damp smell to it, which I think was kind of interesting. Is that's the one thing I didn't realize you would smell some like the moisture in the air to some extent in some of those grow rooms. But got to see all my favorite strains: Lemon Dog Cookies, Blood Orange, two ones I love out of their fold. Not high testers at all, but it's just leaving room for the terps. And the one of the interesting things that they mentioned was really one that they had to deal with water purification so much because the water coming out of the municipal was pretty terrible. So it was constantly doing osmosis and reverse osmosis systems. And he mentioned that, like, I guess air conditioning was one of the biggest energy draws on the grid. And something like one of the AC units on the building could easily do a hospital, and there were 5. And I was like, holy shit balls. So outside of the fact that I used to be in machining and I just have a weird fascination, of course, with mechanical things. I was a CNC machinist for years. So I love the idea of workflow and how things can fit together so neatly. And then to think of these, like, you know, bus sized units pulling all this air, it really gave me a much deeper appreciation. And I already gave so much of an appreciation for cannabis, but just to what depth people are really trying to grow it and make it work in certain environments where it could never work either in the wild or due to legal, you know, we're not allowed to do outdoor grows in PA. And just, you know, their R&D side of it, and where they were trying to figure out differences in light spectrum given how they had to deal with the paint that was on their walls. It was just every little thing, you know, in the same way that you've gone so deep into just being able to look at the nutrient base of how the plant grows and how you can provide it with the right environment and food. And then somebody out there is nerding out on light strips, and somebody else is out there obviously blowing glass in an artistic way. It was like, I never get to see this, and this contributes so much to the end product. One of the best things was the extraction lab, naturally, because I feel like that's really where, as a lover of dabs, a lot of the magic happens. I finally got to see like a jar just literally of like $50,000 worth of slab dabs and a big old jar of distillate oil. And had seen too many pictures, but finally got to at least really get up on like a good old jar of terps. The impact was just, I think, almost in the way when I got to talk to other people in the industry like yourself and others, it was like, oh, I can definitely stay a while. Even though as a hobbyist or as a connoisseur or as a medical patient, there's always these other reasons why cannabis would be a part of my life. But I never imagined, even on its own self-sustain, like not really a career, but as an investment of like work. There's so many facets. If I get bored of the retail side, you can go to the grow. If you get bored of grow, you can think about extraction, and there's so much mastery in each part. Filled my brain with just ideas and was like, this isn't even an appropriate lane for me to be in, but oh God, I just want to ask if I can help solve this one problem. Maybe I have a dumb theory that nobody thought of, or maybe if I ask the right question, I'll learn the thing that will unlock the new piece of knowledge in my mind. I get to see another grow down in Florida soon and see a completely different approach to how they do things. And for me, especially now, and hearing things like you mentioned, just to be able to understand a little bit more about when they are mentioning percentage of their nutrient richness. And I hear silica come up a lot. I understand some things about it, but I don't think I understand it in the way it interacts with plants and growth nearly as well as it seems to be mentioned. So for me, it gives me a lot more to look forward to, especially with cannabis, because I'm like 2 or 3 episodes away from episode 100. I felt like, man, I wonder what the next 100 are going to be like, because, that's years. You put out one a week, that's, 2 more years of life. And where will the market be and where will I be? And funny enough, it does not feel like I'll probably be any more bored, hopefully better informed. But, if I get to communicate with folks like yourself and really learn how deep it goes in certain areas, it just, I don't know, there's an energy to it. I'll probably take an hour to get to bed after all this too, just because so much to process and think about,
Yeah, it definitely is interesting. And the other thing too, I would say on the show is like, there's definitely been like shitty weeks where like coming on and hanging out with the friends and all the awesome fans that are on here, they're super supportive, definitely like made my day after a shitty day or whatever. Like it's definitely one of the other things I wanted to say kind of on the other side, because we talked about some of the negatives. That's definitely one of the huge positives, is like how much that, it is kind of nice. We've kind of built a huge community. We have over 8,000 members in the Facebook group now, the Aquaponic cannabis growers. We have, we just hit, actually, since the last episode, we've hit 12,000 subscribers now on the channel. And we only hit 10,000 like not that long ago. You guys have been awesome helping getting the word out about the channel. Yeah, so it really is been a kind of really good lately, and just awesome, so much support, especially going out to the different conventions and stuff like that. People being like, oh man, I learned this thing on your show and it totally saved my grow, or you totally saved me a ton of money on this thing, or like this episode was so cool, it's so much fun to meet all these different people. I mean, shit, I can go anywhere in the world now and I can find a bag of weed in like an hour or two. I got off the plane in Zimbabwe, in Harare, and I had a bag of weed from someone who listens to my podcast within 2 hours. That's fucking awesome.
That it's like better than awesome. Whenever I look at the map, and it's got to be incredible, I'm sure, after that long and how many people are dedicated listeners to you, to feel like, wow, like, as I said, like I feel like a dude just smokes weed in a bedroom in Hapro, but there is somebody potentially, that there is that connection with. And to even know that it's like, multi-continental and you can experience that personally. I know that we mentioned, since you grew up not too far from where I'm at, that if when you're on this side of the coast, we potentially also may be able to interact and be friendly in that way. And it really does show the community growth to it. And it's kind of funny because I think in other areas, I always tell people, if I was like a Kardashian thong strap, I'd probably have tenfold the followers and half of the value of content. But in the same way, people told me, don't put cannabis in the name for it, you're going to fight uphill against certain things, SEO is going to suck. There's ways you can try to make the right package for the algorithm and the system, but in a lot of other ways, I felt I'd rather not really have to tuck it this time, because I think it's about trying to actually do it for people who are looking for it, as opposed to doing it to like hide in the corners like we had to. And so I think it does bring a lot of a better stigma to what's been happening with cannabis. Very, very excited, especially because to see that you actually have people in a lot, like, just what an incredible thing to be able to have access to and to have grown, really, because it's not a given. They try to shut it down all the time. Only adds more value, I think, to the effort.
Oh yeah, Dirtman Dan lives near you too. Well, maybe the three of us can get together and maybe do a little live, or maybe I'm gonna be there on a Thursday. Maybe we could just do a live together and just do like a live event somewhere.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I got at least 3 mics, I'm sure.
Hell yeah, that'd be awesome. I can bring some gear too if we need. He's got gear too. All three of us actually have recording gear, so that'll work out fine. But yeah, I'll have to talk to Dan and see if we can do that, because that would be really neat. Kind of have like 3 different shows all together and jamming like in person, and that would be fucking dope.
It would be.
We'll have to do it. I think it's a plan now. So that'll definitely be. Look forward to that. Did you have any other questions that you wanted to ask about podcasting and stuff? I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I can think of other than yeah, I don't know. It just kind of, sometimes it can be a little bit disheartening. Sometimes some months you're going to have like not that many new subscribers, and it can kind of feel kind of down, or maybe you have a couple episodes where like people just aren't feeling it, and that's fine. Just don't give up. I think that's, I've talked to 2 or 3 other fellow podcasters out of giving up, and I definitely, all of them still do it now. None of them have regretted it. So I think that's something else to think about if you do really kind of get down on it at any point.
Yeah, thankfully at this point is more of a source of inspiration, but I'm always trying to think, can you maintain? I think there was probably 1 month during the election cycle that I just took like 6 weeks off of it, because talk about, no matter what your politics are, just a fucking crazy election cycle. And I just at that point was like, I think I just need all my brain space to just process this and stay sane. And saw the dip in listenership. And then you had that first feeling of like, should I have just powered through? Like, was this the right move? Do metrics rule all? I was like, no, I'm just here to provide what you can. And in that way, the intimacy of people willing to spend their time just listening to me flap my lips, or, anybody really just spread ideas. Like, what a blessing, an absolute just honor to be able to have people willing to waste their time on what I think.
It is something too, if you can keep a consistent schedule, it definitely will help your metrics. People listening, try to always keep your same schedule. People get really weird and annoyed and will send you like angry messages if you miss a week. I know I had people messaging me even just last week because we were traveling and shit, and I was like, you guys know I'm at the conference, come on guys, you did a live video on the way there, come on. Anyways, but it's fine. Funny.
That is funny.
Yeah, did you have any other questions?
That was actually all the questions I had for now. I have a couple brewing, but I think I should be able to have you on my show coming up this upcoming. I'm going to aim for Wednesday, and so mine will be releasing a little bit later on. You'll probably be releasing on the back half of the month, but I'm looking forward to having you on. So have some questions brewing in my head, but nothing concrete right now. You've given me a lot to think about.
Here's just a quick glimpse of his stuff over in Buzzsprout.
Yeah, thankfully they've been friendly. I haven't had any issues with them hosting. It's been smooth sailing and a real easy to use host for it.
Like I said, it's got some really cool, unique content. Does chat have any questions for our guest here tonight? We've got one. What does he see in the market shifting towards in his area? Flower, concentrates, pre-rolls, carts, edibles? That's a great question, actually.
Yeah, very good question. So we have Jersey, as I mentioned a little earlier on. Looks like it's right on the precipice of going rec, and that's probably going to dictate, I think, a lot of the influence on the state, because I'm right on the Philadelphia side, and Pittsburgh doesn't really have so much of a pull from the Ohio side as far as their market. So it'll probably end up kind of moving to the New York, New Jersey preference style. And the big thing with rec markets when they hit is edibles, because we have ingestible cannabis products, I would say, things you can swallow, but none of them are food. They don't allow it at all to be in the final form factor of food. You can't buy brownies, cookies, things like that. You can just buy capsules or oil-based tinctures, no alcohol-based yet, which means they don't really do sublingual at all. It's all pretty much down into the belly. So I think that in the PA market, and what you're going to see really move up the East Coast as rec starts to sweep towards the upper corner, is edibles become a lot more central, because finding like gummies, even people moving them like, because they went on like a good vacation into a weed state, they're really not as big of a thing here, the chocolate bar kind of game and all that. So I think if Incredibles puts their big old foothold in the state when it goes rec, or if they just get Jersey to at least get brand recognition, you're probably going to see a big push on the ingestible edible side. Outside of that, flower dominates the market. It's like 70% of all sales. And I think that's maybe not too uncommon, but PA does have a very, very large appetite for concentrates. And although I don't have enough experience to have created that thought process or description myself, everything's a new thing in the states I would go to. But I've heard growers mention that not necessarily the consumption of dabs, but the level of like bitching about terpenes, maybe everybody feels like they're an armchair terpene connoisseur. They said is different. A lot of places usually go for the, I need the highest THC, I need the highest THC, and distillate ends up winning. In PA, it's a lot more likely you're going to find somebody who still wants to see, sugar at 80+ percentile, which isn't too hard to find, but they're also going to want their terps at like 11% somehow. Even when the math doesn't even fucking work out, they will still want like 99% THC, 15% terpenes. In our state, they make you test for terpenes on almost every product. So even in Jersey with their medical program, you didn't have to test for it at all. They just averaged the THC and CBD. It made everybody kind of a little bit more of a nerd. So I think in our state, flavor is a bigger deal than it is in a lot of them. And of course, we're starving for edibles too.
Good too. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're talking about the medical part of the product, that's really where you're going to find it, is in learning what your terpene profile is that's working best for your issues. So that's definitely something that I'm a big proponent of. But it can be annoying from the producer side to have to pay for all that extra testing. But certainly, I think it makes for a better medical market in general. That's for sure. The sublingual stuff, we make a powdered sublingual, which is really awesome. And it's certainly something that I think would be interesting to see in that market as well, if it's not there already. This kind of gives an option for this non-oil based, or it has oil in it, but not, you're not just taking a bunch of oil, it's a very small, much smaller dose.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, terpenes definitely are more in focus. And I'm glad that in our program, we were lucky enough where they required it to some extent. What I find, because they required it, but only now, I think in December, they put out like a 10 o'clock email from the DOH where they pulled or encouraged the pulling of all of the terpene added or terpene enriched products off the market because they weren't sure how much medical benefit they had. We had that suspicion as a company for a long time, even as users, we all kind of felt like they released this one that had almond derived terpenes in it. And I know people with nut allergies should not even get close to that. And in a medical market, it really is not as responsible to allow that. So that would have been a good point for them to start. But, 2 years later, they start the investigation. A lot of people, although terpenes, I think, champion completely, some people try to high score it a little bit too much still, unfortunately. And there's a level of like a lack of education there because they think if one product has more, it's better. And it's not, it's a combination sometimes more so than just blatant volume. So sometimes they miss that baby with the bathwater.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, some of those terpenes are not good for you in super high amounts at all. So, D-limonene is used as a solvent, right? You can actually extract with it in place of butane if you want to. It's that kind of insane. So, yeah, I don't really like any of those added terp carts. They taste horrible to me. I never understood what the popularity, maybe the kids that don't have a palate for cannabis like them. Maybe it's like a whiskey thing or, an alcohol thing. You kind of have to get used. I don't know. I never understood it.
Yeah, it seems more like for vape heads, people who would like the nicotine market because it's all flavored there. There's no such thing as like a raw nicotine vape where you can really taste the tobacco.
Right. That's called doha. If you know what that is. Yeah, Doha. You know that?
No, never heard of that. What's that?
Oh, so it's the tip of, actually, here, I'll pull it up. It's a very special type of tobacco. There you go. This is Doha.
Oh, damn.
So it's just a little, comes in a little tiny thing. You smoke it with this little pipe. You do like little one hitters off of it, and it gets wrecked. It's just the tip of the newest growth of the tobacco, like the top, a quarter inch or tenth of an inch or whatever, of each growth tip of the tobacco leaf, and then they dry it, and it's all grown halal. And anyways, it's a very specialized high grade tobacco. It's like the headies of the headies of tobacco.
You know, I initially, and just a high thought would be like, oh, I wonder if they grade tobacco. And it's like, well, probably, but maybe in bulk like they do with certain other things where they don't care too much about quality. But I'm kind of glad in a way that there is like a high class tobacco market, even though it's nothing that I'm particularly interested in, but almost them now because they're just taking it so far.
So
It's gold encrusted. It's fucking awesome.
If you make docha from shaman's tobacco, they also call it Hopi tobacco, which is Nicotia rustica. It's actually mildly hallucinogenic. It's pretty nice actually. But there's a wide range of different tobacco species. Some of them are smokable, some of them aren't. Don't think just because it's in the Nicotia family that it's smokable. A lot of people make that mistake in California and have a really bad time. But
Yeah, I'd imagine so.
yeah. The white tea of tobacco. Yes, that is very much it. It is the super headiest of the tobacco, and I mean, if you're not used to it, it'll make you throw up. Like it's very strong. Like you have to take baby hits of it. You don't roast it. You will regret it if you do.
It said the average user does 6 grams a day.
Yep.
That's pretty solid for some heady tobacco right there.
Well, yeah, it's fucking crazy. But yeah, I don't know. I don't smoke. I've smoked it before, and I had a friend of mine who was from Libya, and he used to get really, really high grade from it and of this stuff for his shop. And he would, give me he'd open up one of them to test with his buddies and stuff, and he'd always give me a little bit to try. That's how I found out about it. But,
that is crazy. I bet it makes, I guess, probably our market tobacco look like swag.
Right. Well, unless you had anything else, I think maybe we'll wrap up the show here. I'll put your Instagram up here again. Be sure to give him a follow. He has a ton of really good content. Again, some interesting and unique content as well, especially with those receptors. I think that's definitely some of the more interesting stuff that I've heard in a long time in terms of any of that kind of stuff. I'm sure there's other info out there on that, but I had never heard of anything like that, especially with the capsaicin. And then also his podcast over here on Buzzsprout, and then I'm sure on other platforms as well. I know I saw it quite a bit on Google when I searched. It looks like you have it uploaded in quite a few other places as well.
Yeah, Stitcher, Apple, Google, all the things, RS feed everywhere you can possibly put it where they let you.
Any other
Pandora's been kind of a dick.
Any other links that you wanted me to throw up?
I'd say the other one to look for, as there's videos up there right now, but it'll be rebranding in the next couple of weeks, is the U.S. Chamber of Cannabis, a force I just started on YouTube. Logo pending because I just had about 5 minutes in paint, and I was just like, let me just whip this up. But it's some videos that I did initially under the old company I used to work for, similar to just informative. They were a longer format because our video guy didn't want to do much editing. But it'll be rebranded. I'll probably archive them and then start a whole new series, similar to my approach to the podcast, but a lot more visual, obviously. Actually, the first episode of the series I'm going to call Drug Tests is what liquid makes the best bong water?
I will tell you, vodka, not a good idea. You will get
That sounds pretty harsh.
drunk. No, so my ex thought it would be a brilliant idea to put really high proof vodka into the hookah. And all of us were so drunk vaping that or like breathing it in that way that it was weird because you're like super drunk, but you don't want to vomit because your stomach's not irritated. So it's like a really weird feeling.
That does sound strange.
But here's his YouTube that he was talking about.
Yeah, some of the content's still from the old company. They had a woman on Project Mindful. So I said I left up what was there and it'll be rebranded soon, but feel free to jump in there. There's a lot of random content, but all cannabis focused so that you can know a bit about what's going on in the PA side of things as well as on the medical side. And as I said, yeah, what liquid makes the best bong water? Because I'm thinking of putting up not only, municipal water, distilled, to go through temperature cycles, but also like coconut milk, animal milk, vegetable oil. And I thought, although I'm not necessarily a fan of the vapor, but it is a heavy enough oil. I thought, motor oil might be usable because it's so heavy. It boils at 250 and doesn't even steam. But it's really not necessarily that we have to put our mouths on. I have a vacuum, thankfully. It's really trying to figure out draw resistance. And also, how do you even measure what the best bong water is? Is it user comfort? Is it perceived high? Or is it, scientific interest?
You should add temperature too and do a hot, a warm and cold.
Yeah, funny enough, I run my Puffco dry just because I spilled it so many times when I take it along with me. But I made a bong once that was it went through cold then hot. I don't think I got that order right, I'll be honest with you, but it changed it.
I dated a girl for a long couple of years. And the reason why I was super hardcore into her the moment I met her, she invited me back to her apartment after I met her and we smoked and whatever. And then she pulls a homemade Pykrete bong out of the freezer. How many women are into World War II ship chemistry with Pykrete and then decided to turn it into a bong? Like, that's fucking cool. That's the kind of stuff I want to hang out with. That's the kind of weird sciencey, crafty shit that I can get down on. Right? So that was cool. She dissolved a bunch of toilet paper and paper towel rolls to make the Pykrete and then made a mold and then formed the bong and then basically had a frame that she made out of it, the sphere and the top and the stem, and then just paper mache more wet Pykrete onto the outside of it as it froze. It was fucking neat.
That probably looked pretty cool too. I think my dad was a vet, so at one point when we raided into the weird dark closets after he passed, I had found a pretty smelly gas mask, and it was a single filter with the kind of elephant part on it. And naturally, probably because we had seen it in 2 films already, we fitted it to be able to use it as a smoking device. And only once we really had to do that. That still had particulate from yesteryear in there. So it looked cooler than it hit. But at the very least, we did get to gas mask up once and really regret our decisions. It was great. Great times.
We used to take a cooler. We had one cooler that we drilled a hole in the bottom of my ex's pool. And we would put a big old giant deep 2 or 3 gram bowl at the top of it. And then we push it down in the water and make a giant gravity bong. And then we swim up inside of it and just take a couple of big breaths and then swim up. And you get 2 people at a time in there. It was great. We used to have fun at the house.
That is an engineering marvel. That's awesome. Yeah, the one thing I'm most curious about with the bong test, and this is probably especially because I understand a bit of the internet is more visual than I normally am, is throw in, one of the milks. I don't necessarily prefer animal milk, but I can deal. And make milk chocolate the weird way. So throw some Hershey syrup into the bong itself, throw in milk, and then when you hit it, it naturally makes chocolate milk. And by science, technically, if it's really cold and you recondense some of the vapor or the smoke from however you consumed it, it should decarboxylate it, reform it into probably like a CBN. And if you drink that milkshake, which probably doesn't taste nearly as bad as most bong water would because chocolate cleans up nice, it potentially would have slight edible capabilities, is the theory I might have to operate on.
You're
I just don't
saying
know if,
it'd be more likely to turn into 11 hydroxyl in that scenario. That's
yeah,
what
I
you're
guess once you digest it.
Yeah. Huh. Or I don't know. So what's interesting is there's some interesting interactions that I still don't think are properly mapped out yet. It's the alkaloids in coca, like that they use for chocolate. Because there's definitely like proven synergy with a couple of those alkaloids in some different weird ways. And again, this is some of the interesting, strange science with the endocannabinoid system that just you have no fucking idea about any of this shit yet. And there isn't really any good research on it either, you know?
Yeah, they said that you can actually find anandamide in the darkest, like, raw chocolate, which is our endocannabinoid, which of course is way better than THC as far as its availability and synergy with our body. It's the perfect key for our receptor. And they also found that fruit flies have an or have anandamide in them, but no cannabinoid receptors. So it's like, why do they produce a chemical it doesn't seem they can use? But I still feel like it's because we're looking through them through our vision. We're like, they don't have the same parts as we do, so why would they make this? It's like, because it probably does something different, obviously. But we love to judge it through our own spectrum. So knowing that chocolate has a little bit of cannabinoids in it and that it has the further synergy through the alkaloid groups, it makes you feel like you could make like a really amazing edible if you harness a lot of those like nutrient hacks to it, little avocado fat for some binding as well for like the hydrolypic version. And you can make like this chocolate smoothie that just heals you, right? Heals what ails you.
And this is some of the weird stuff that I think that isn't getting enough attention. And also some of these overly restrictive states kind of block you from this. And, that's you can't do any dairy products unless it's vegan based, which is definitely a blocking, a lot of different things. Although I make a pretty good medicated vegan cheese, which is definitely, you can just make lactobacillus and then take the curds and then make your infuse your cheese and away you go.
Yeah, it's pretty much a one-to-one process right there as far as the parallel.
Yep. No, it's super simple. It's nothing overly complicated. Anybody can do it in their kitchen. It's just you don't see many people making it on the market.
Yeah. Yeah, it just makes me want to wonder, especially in the food side of it. And that's why I think, that'll be what a little bit the future PA is too. And even if it isn't something I'll be looking forward to, because not only does it help with normalizing it, but it's one of the best ways to put it in.
Gotta get the medicated cheesesteaks.
Oh, I make a mean 3-bean medicated chili. I did buffalo last time I made it, but obviously you can just leave the meat out. RSO based with it, but sometimes I just do a straight flour decarb if I have the time.
I make a really, really good medicated béarnaise sauce. Yeah, that's another good one. Make a nice like tri-tip or a nice big fucking hunk of meat, pour that on top, put your mushrooms on there. You have a nice evening.
I love it.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up the show. We're just about hitting our normal wrap up time. I appreciate you coming on the show. Why don't you tell everybody how to find you one last time, and then I'll do the last couple of announcements here at the end.
Sounds perfect. Yeah, I release my show every Sunday night between 7 and 8:30. You can find me, search The Cannabis Professor on Apple, Google. I host on Buzzsprout, thecannabisprofessor.buzzsprout.com. I'm just about at 100 episodes. So even if you want to find content where it's just having a sesh or looking at something super sciencey, or maybe just a weird dive into which vape might give you the most, you should be able to find a good variety of content on it. And also be sure to check out on YouTube, the U.S. Chamber of Cannabis, rebranding coming soon, some real interesting content and exploration of cannabis there to really help grow and build more of a community. And then on an absolute tangent, I happen to run a food podcast called Year of the Sandwich. There's only maybe 10 or 12 episodes so far. In case you ever want to just really have a little bit of fun with food, I do it as a British man. and do it trapped under the crust of the earth and make up food conspiracies for gourmet conversations. So that is usually one that might be great for a session. And then, of course, on Instagram at the cannabis.professor.
Heck yeah. All right. And it's nice to talk to somebody from our field from Philly. And I think you're the first one I've actually talked to that, you know, does content and things like that, or works in the industry in any way. So that's super, super cool to have you on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, man. It's been an absolute blast. I look forward to being able to have you on my cast as well, and do even more in the future. This has been a hell of a time.
Oh, yeah. So here's the website for the conference coming up, regenerativeorganiccannabis.com. I do apologize, I got the URL wrong earlier. It is regenerativeorganiccannabis.com, takes you there. You can find out about the upcoming conferences. You got Michigan, we'll be up in Michigan, February 25th, 26th, 27th. Definitely a really awesome event. Kevin Jodry, Susan Maywright Evans, Chris Trump, myself, Eric Branstead, Joshua Steensland. He's fucking awesome. Probably, in my opinion, one of, if not the most knowledgeable at growing cannabis at scale of anyone that I know in the industry right now. Myself, Dr. Lane Ingham, Wade Laughter will be joining us via a video. He recorded a video and talks about some heavy stuff that I think you guys are eventually will be posted publicly. But he gives a really cool talk about his life and working in cannabis and kind of the different things that he's achieved. It's a really cool talk, so we'll be interested in that. And then a whole bunch of cool panelists. There's a bunch more people than just what's on here. For Michigan, we have a bunch of local panelists, local breeders and growers. So that'll be fun. And then we have in Maine, we have Kevin Jodry. We have the same group of people, but even more local speakers in the evenings and for the different breeder panels. And that'll be up in Maine, March 25th through 27th. That'll be a lot of fun. And then Oklahoma, April 29th through May 1st, which is going to be a blast as well. So definitely looking forward to this. I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to get a venue here in Oklahoma where we can smoke cannabis during the event as well. So that'll be a lot of fun. I'll be able to smoke inside while the talks are going on. But definitely check it out. If you haven't been there before, it's an amazing, amazing event. And definitely one of the coolest things. We have a big seed swap on Sunday so that, you know, you can gather a whole bunch of goodies. I know I made out like a bandit in Humboldt, so definitely check that out. And then everyone also be sure to check out apmjclass.com if you're looking for a full top to bottom experience learning aquaponic cannabis. We do have a full online training school. Marty and I have been working on a whole bunch of new content for that. We'll be throwing the next batch of new slides up here in the next week or two. We're just finishing up editing on that stuff. I've just been away. But you can check that out over there. We have just a ton of cool content on a whole bunch of different facilities, build outs, all different types of issues you run into. We have over 700 slides and counting. Yeah, just a really whole solution. And we have tons of how-to videos for facility tours that we don't have on YouTube, a bunch of other cool stuff on there. So definitely check that out if it's something else that you're interested in learning more about. Alrighty, I think that's just about everything. Oh, also, there we go. Sorry, I'm a little bit slow today. apmjnewts.com if you guys need aquaponic cannabis newts. You can sign up for the commercial subscription, or you can buy your newts by the pound or ounce or whatever else you want. Lots of good stuff. All this stuff is low in heavy metals. We test it for that and for fish safety. So, you know, you don't have to worry about the sourcing on this. Roger does a very good job of sourcing everything for us. We also have flowering kits and veg kits. You can pick how many weeks of veg and how many weeks of flower. And then you can click that, pick the gallons for your aquaponic system if you got fish tanks or if you got IBC systems or whatever, and then how many weeks of flower, and then we'll send you premix kits that just kind of pour open as you go over the course of the grow. And you can even, you know, if you need a little bit more fertigation, you can actually double it. You can see some side by sides with and without the nutrients. there. Marty did a bunch of side-by-sides with the without nutrients, kind of see the difference in production. So definitely check that out if you're looking for if growing aquaponic cannabis at home. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out his podcast over at the Cannabis Professor. And then you can always find us at SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, all the things. We will see you guys again next week. Next week's guest is going to be, I had it open. Gosh darn it. I'm not on point today. I apologize, guys. Next week's guest will be Wayne Schwind from the Periodic Effects. They have a really awesome podcast. They're actually almost as many podcasts as I have. They're like 250 something, so super cool to have them on. And then the week after that, we have Pride of Lion Seeds. And then the last week in the week of February, we might not have a show. I will be on the road at the conference, and it's very hard for me to get time to do that in the evenings without totally getting into a bunch of other stuff that I should be doing at the same time. So I think we probably won't have an episode the last weekend of February this month. I do apologize, guys, but excuse me, we do have a really cool guest. We do have Mean Gina Mendocino lined up for the first week of March. So we have a really cool lineup coming up. So yeah, thanks everybody for watching. We will see you guys again next week. That is a wrap on the show, everybody. Thanks a lot.